Not long after Han Li activated the Brightsight Spirit Eyes, his expression began to stir as if having discovered something. He raised his finger to the Heaven Void Cauldron and released several thin threads of azure spiritual chi that soon disappeared from sight. In a flicker of blue light, the ice flames began to surge around the cauldron, causing it to expand from its original size of several inches to 3 meters wide. Clear carvings of landscapes, animals, and other aspects of gentle nature could be seen on its surface. When Han Li saw this sudden transformation, he calmly stood up and beckoned to it, having it move a meter in front of him as it floated in the air. After examining it a moment more, Han Li passed his hand through the icy flames and pressed it against the cauldron. As a result, the icy flames surged and swept up into a tornado around it. Followed by the sound of dragon cries, a 3-meter-long flood dragon of blue flames emerged from the tornado. It shook itself with delight before suddenly disappearing into the cauldron. At that same moment, the cauldron's faint copper exterior instantly turned blue. The various animals on its exterior suddenly began to shine with light and seemed to come to life, roaming across its surface in an incredible display. Han Li was unfazed by the sight of this and quickly pierced the cauldron with several azure threads from his palm, pouring in an unending stream of spiritual power. When a large quantity of spiritual power was absorbed, the cauldron began to hum. As Han Li gazed at the cauldron, blue ancient characters began to appear and float across on the cauldron's surface, and in a flicker of light, they began to gather 3 meters in the air to form a strange spell scripture. Han Li raised his head to look at it and unconsciously slowed the infusion of spiritual chi into the cauldron, causing the characters to suddenly dim before disappearing. In his alarm, he hastily resumed the flow of spiritual chi, causing the scripture to appear once more in a faint blue light. The scriptures weren't long and only reached about 1,000 characters in length. When Han Li read through it, his face initially revealed happiness, but his smile soon turned bitter. The scripture was easy enough to understand. It was the method to control the Heaven Void Cauldron. The scripture clearly stated that there were 2 conditions to control the cauldron. The first would be to refine the celestial ice flames. The second condition was a kind of ancient technique known as the artifact imprint techniques. These techniques were established to control divine spirit treasures and other equivalent treasures. Each and every divine spirit treasure passed down from antiquity has their own specific artifact imprint technique. These specific techniques were incapable of being exchanged between their respective treasures, as each one had their own characteristics and abilities. As a result, there is a clear divide between ordinary ancient treasures and divine spirit treasures. Only ancient treasures that had an artifact imprint technique could be considered divine spirit treasures, and it was only after their respective command technique was cultivated that they could be sealed within one's body and could be slowly tempered. Of course, divine spirit treasures aren't able to be fused with one's spiritual sense unlike common treasures. Rather, they are closer to devilish artifacts in this regard. In order to gain influence on the treasure's spiritual nature, one had to use artifact imprint technique as the treasure was housed in their body. As a result, the divine spirit treasure's spiritual nature will gradually shift to become suitable to the user's spiritual sense, eventually reaching the stage where one could wholly unite with their treasure and use it to its fullest extent. And given the fantastical might of divine spirit treasures, it reduces its wielder to a supporting role while in use due to the strain it puts on the user's spiritual sense. As a result, it isn't something that can be casually used such as one's own bonded magic treasure. Rather, it requires opportune timing to use but would allow its user to easily defeat their opponents. In summary, the trade-offs for a divine spirit treasure's amazing power was the inability to use it immediately, requiring its owner to use its respective artifact imprint technique to mold the spiritual nature of the divine spirit treasure, as well as some difficulty in using it during combat. The scripture above the Heaven Void Cauldron had explained this in simple terms, and Han Li felt quite a bit of joy from this. But after he read the incantation, his expression to turn unsightly. Although the incantation itself was rather simple, it comprised of 3 layers. The first layer of the incantation required the cultivator to be at mid-nascent soul stage. As for the second and third layers, they required the cultivator to be at late nascent soul stage and the deity transformation stage respectively to cultivate. As a result, he would only be able to use only a small portion of the Heaven Void Cauldron's power after he cultivated the first layer. Greatly disappointed, he withdrew his hand and ceased pouring spiritual power in the cauldron, causing the scripture to immediately fade away. Han Li stared at the huge cauldron in front of him with a gloomy expression. Although he didn't know how much strength was a small portion of the cauldron's power, Han Li didn't have high hopes for it. Would it be able to compare with the Aureate sword formation and purple apex flames? After a moment of silence, Han Li sighed once more and decided on refining the first layer of the cauldron's artifact imprint technique. This would allow him to store the heaven void cauldron within his body, allowing him to later nurture it. With that thought, Han Li swept his sleeve, sweeping up the huge cauldron in a jet of azure light and instantly shrinking it back to its original size. Then, with the cauldron grasped in his hand, he put it away into his storage pouch in a flash of light. With that done, Han Li sat cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. The first layer of the artifact imprint technique appeared in his mind, and he began to silently comprehend it. The technique wasn't very complicated, taking Han Li only about a month's time to fully comprehend it. However, the scripture didn't state that how long he would have to temper the heaven void cauldron. Fortunately, the artifact imprint technique worked on its own. So long as the divine spirit treasure was kept in one's body, his spiritual sense gradually influenced the treasure's spiritual nature. 2 months later, Han Li emerged from seclusion. Comprehending the artifact imprint technique was far quicker than he had anticipated, allowing him to seal the heaven void cauldron inside his body. As for his remaining time, he was using the materials that Senior Marshal Brother Cheng had given him, as well as the puppet remains from Heaven Void Hall, to refine a single nascent soul-grade puppet. This wasn't a result of not having enough materials, but the remarkably high failure rate of refining the nascent soul stage puppets. He originally had enough materials to refine 4 puppets, but he only succeeded in creating a single one, much to Han Li's regret. Needless to say, Monarch Soul Divergence's puppet body needed more and higher grade materials to create. The success rate of creating the puppet body was sure to be even worse, so it was possible that he would need to collect several times as many materials for additional attempts. When he mentioned this matter, Monarch Soul Divergence proudly explained that the refinement method was something that he had created himself, and that there was no need to worry about that as he simply wouldn't fail. If he truly failed, then the fault would most likely be in the refinement method itself. Having heard that he wouldn't have to collect even more materials, Han Li sighed with relief. Now that he emerged from seclusion, he first paid Nangongwan a visit in the restricted area and observed the curse's condition, then returning to his cave residence and spending several days refining many medicine pills greatly useful for Mu Paling's core formation. Afterwards, Han Li bid farewell to Senior Marshal Brother Cheng and Lu Luo before heading to the 7 Spirit Islands to meet with Master Sunreach. Although Senior Marshal Brother Cheng and Lu Luo were occupied with the acquisition of new sources for the sect, they had personally sent off Han Li from the Dreamcloud Mountains, causing Han Li to smile. After Han Li left the Drifting Cloud sect, he took north in a streak of light. The 7 Spirit Islands were to the north of the state of Zai. It was reported that if one flew a day across the endless sea, one could see the huge whirlpool and the 7 Spirit Islands. A week later, Han Li found himself on the edge of the endless seas, but before he could see the 7 Spirit Islands, he had already sensed an astonishing change in the sea. Although the sea water was as murky as ever, it was now a slight tint of blue, and with his spiritual sense, he was able to detect small fish and other life in the waters. The fearsome sea beasts that originally lived in these waters were nowhere to be seen, and the most notable of all was the massive change in the nearby spiritual chi. After flying for half a day, Han Li eventually sensed a huge spiritual chi source from a distance away, as well as 7 smaller spiritual chi fluctuations nearby, the so-called 7 Spirit Islands. Greatly curious, Han Li couldn't help but fly faster. When he could faintly make out a few dots on the sea, he saw small groups of cultivators floating in front of them. They comprised 5 foundation establishment cultivators with 1 core formation cultivator acting as their leader, a woman in palace robes. Han Li didn't conceal any trace of himself and met the group of cultivators directly head-on. Naturally, they welcomed him as soon as they saw him. When the woman in a palace robe saw Han Li, she deeply bowed to him after a brief moment of surprise. She respectfully said, "Greetings, Senior. I am a disciple of the Harmonious Bond sect. I've received orders from my superiors to block off this section of the sea. Might I ask you what brings you here?" Not responding to her, Han Li frowned and muttered, "Block off. It seems fellow Taoist Sunreach was correct. There truly is a problem here. Could it be that you're Senior Han for the Drifting Cloud sect?" After the woman took another look at Han Li's face. That's right, I'm Han Li. Master Sunreach had invited here. Will you have to make a report before I can enter? When the group of cultivators heard Han Li's name, they were thrown into turmoil. As of current, Han Li's reputation has reached a stage of fame was known to the entire cultivation world of the heavenly south. In their alarm, the group of cultivators revealed expressions of awe. Not daring to slight him, the woman in palace robes quickly said, "Since it's Senior Han, there is no need to make a report. Senior Sunreach already gave the command to let you pass. This junior will be bringing you to Spirit Turtle Island." Han Li nodded with an emotionless face and said nothing else. The woman then called out to the cultivators behind her and had them remain behind before guiding Han Li. They flew towards a black dot in the distance, an island that spanned about 30 kilometers. Knowing it was the first time Han Li arrived at this place, the woman carefully explained, "Senior Han, this is Spirit Phoenix Island, the base of the Harmonious Bond sect. It is neighboring the Spirit Turtle Island, which is the base of the Great Truth sect." Han Li glanced at the location that the woman pointed out and found that the island was still too far away to see. However, he was able to sense a huge spiritual source in a different direction, releasing clear and astonishing spiritual chi fluctuations. The source of this immense quantity of powerful spiritual chi must be the rumored whirlpool. Han Li pondered as he followed after the woman into the distance. About 2 hours later, he arrived at Spirit Turtle Island. This island was slightly larger than Spirit Phoenix Island, and its outline did resemble a turtle, as suggested of its namesake. When the two had drawn close to the island, the woman had sent out a voice transmission talisman, causing a wild streak of light to welcome them when they arrived. When Han Li saw this familiar light, he stopped and sent a voice transmission from a distance. "Is that you, fellow Taoist Sunreach? You flatter me by welcoming me personally." Master Sunreach widely smiled when he heard Han Li and replied, "He, fellow Taoist Han is someone who keeps their promises. It is only right for me to do so." Afterwards, he flew until he was only 100 meters away. The light then disappeared to reveal the Taoist priest's silhouette. Han Li smiled and saluted him. Master Sunreach instructed the woman to return, and then he turned to Han Li and smiled. "Fellow Taoist Han, follow me to my cave residence. I've already informed fellow Taoist Wei. As for Devil Conquered, he is occupied with his own matters and can't come." "That's fine, let's go." Han Li didn't raise any objections and the two immediately set off. On the way, Han Li swept his spiritual sense past the entire island and he unconsciously frowned. The island had a very rich spirit being that spanned about 5 kilometers. There were only a few cultivators on the island, but each of them possessed high cultivation, contrary to Han Li's expectations that there would be low-grade cultivators on the island. This was cause for doubt as well. Not long after, Han Li followed Master Sunreach into the newly formed cave residence. The cave residence was located in an unremarkable stone mountain and was very cleanly cut. Han Li followed Master Sunreach into a large hall and they both took a seat. He then offered Han Li some tea and they began to talk. The old Taoist seemed to avoid mentioning the reason he wanted Han Li to come, instead telling Han Li about the nearby seas as well the sects occupying the 7 spirit islands, as well as a few unaffiliated cultivators he should be aware of. It appeared that Master Sunreach didn't plan to tell him anything until Wei Wuya arrived. Han Li felt unhappy by this, but he revealed none of this and continued his chat with Master Sunreach. After the time it took him to finish a meal, Wei Wuya arrived at the cave residence, and Master Sunreach went out to welcome him and bring him into the hall. Of course, Han Li greeted Wei Wuya when he saw him. When Han Li saw his face, he noticed that Wei Wuya's skin was flawless and his complexion was healthy. He seemed to recover from his wounds from Devil Fall Valley and appeared quite vigorous. Han Li found this odd. To the best of his knowledge, Wei Wuya should have suffered an immense loss of strength from Devil Fall Valley. Since he had recovered so quickly, it seemed he had used quite a few precious medicines. Wei Wuya quickly took a seat and asked, "Brother Sunreach, have you spoke of the matter with Han Li?" "Of course not," Master Sunreach said with a calm expression. "This is something that is better said with both of us. Since Brother Wei has come, it would be better for you to start. I'll just be providing some additional details." After some thought, Wei Wuya agreed. "That's fine. This matter can't be further delay or disaster will befall us." Disaster? When Han Li heard this, interest lit up on his face. It appeared this matter was quite important. "Fellow Taoist Han, I'll make the long story short. The matter is related to the Elder Devil." Wei Wuya's words greatly shocked Han Li. In his alarm, he said, "Isn't the elder devil fleeing due to its heavy wounds?" "That's right. However, doesn't fellow Taoist feel that the giant whirlpool has appeared at an opportune time?" Wei Wuya solemnly said. "The whirlpool appeared in the endless seas as soon as the elder devil fled. We even found some concrete evidence near the whirlpool." Fellow Taoist Han should know that in the final stages of the pursuit of the elder devil, it slaughtered a few cultivation clans as well as a few small sects. We later discovered that these clans and sects all were rumored to possess devilish artifacts. As a result, the devil had managed to acquire 3 of these devilish artifacts. There was also a secret area near the huge whirlpool where we discovered the remains of one of the stolen devilish artifacts, as if directly shattered by the great force. As a result, we suspect that the elder devil had arrived here in the endless seas before we managed to surround it and drive it away. After muttering to himself for a moment, he probingly asked, "Is there something amiss with this whirlpool? You wouldn't be taking this matter so seriously if that wasn't the case, even if the devil caused it." "Brother Han speaks truly," Master Sunreach said with a bitter smile. "If this whirlpool only released spiritual qi, we wouldn't give it much consideration. The crucial problem is that this so-called whirlpool is actually the center of a huge formation that had been sealed long past. The 7 islands are only a portion of the spell formation. Fellow Taoists should now know how serious this matter is." "Sealed spell formation. What is this huge spell formation trying to seal?" Han Li's expression vastly changed. Although he didn't know precisely how large the formation was, he could imagine its immense scale given the distance between the 7 islands. Wei Wuya answered, "We have an idea of what this formation is, but I won't go into the specifics. All that matters is that formation has something to do with the Elder Devil realm as well as the Elder Devils. I'll have Brother Sunreach explain the rest. After all, it was he who first dived to the bottom of the whirlpool and saw what was there." "What is there for me to say? Did you not see it when you arrived?" Taoist Sunreach calmly asked. "At the bottom of the huge whirlpool, there is an endless, unfathomable amount of devilish qi. It is being suppressed by the immense amount of pure spiritual qi of the whirlpool, likely a result of the huge formation. If this erupts, a huge calamity will be sure to fall upon the heavenly south, warping the entirety of its worldly spiritual qi. And even worse is what else we suspect to lie underneath the sea as well. It is certain to be closely related to the devilish qi." Wei Wuya said with a tone of helplessness, "But now that fellow Taoist Han is here, he should have seen it as well. The core of the grand sealing formation has already been destroyed, and the whirlpool is releasing its spiritual qi bit by bit. Eventually, there will come a day where it will no longer be able to suppress the devilish qi. When the devilish qi releases, it will taint at least half of the heavenly south continent and make it so that it is uninhabitable by human cultivators. Since Brother Han's drifting cloud sect is so close to the endless seas, it will be sure to be affected." When Han Li heard this, he was dumbfounded. With a raised brow, he indifferently said, "Since you 3 great cultivators have summoned me here, you should have a method to resolving this problem before it becomes a disaster. If you don't have anything in mind, I am helpless in the face of this." A huge eruption of devilish qi would prove greatly damaging to the drifting cloud sect and the rest of them, and the devilish and righteous Tao wouldn't fare much better. Only the 9 nations union would be able to escape the devilish qi due to their distances from the endless seas, but the lingering effects would be sure to affect them as well. The loss of cultivable qi in half the continent would be sure to stir up war between many sects. After we discovered this great danger, we immediately began to research it so that we may prevent this calamity. As a result, we discovered something related to the sealing formation that was somewhat beyond belief. This matter has something to do with the great Jin Empire. With that said, he glanced at Master Sunreach with an odd expression. "The great Jin Empire?" Han Li asked in alarm. "Does fellow Taoist Han know where we found those records?" Master Sunreach wryly smiled and spoke with a helpless tone. "You mean?" As something came to Han Li's mind, he wore an astonished expression. "It seems fellow Taoist Han guessed it," Master Sunreach wryly smiled. "The information we acquired on this ancient sealing formation was found from secret ancient record that was hidden away in my sect countless years ago. My sect was originally a branch of one of the 3 great sects of the Great Jin, the Grand Truth Sect. In addition, we were sent to the heavenly south in order to watch over the ancient sealing formation." "Your sect originated from the Great Jin," Han Li couldn't help but ask in surprise. "That's right," Master Sunreach sighed. "However, this was something that had occurred countless years ago. Apart from a few particular ancient cultivation arts, our sect has no connection to our originating sect. This would have remained hidden, but because of our current situation, I unintentionally discovered an ancient record mentioning this inside our sect's hidden area. Han Li pensively asked, "Fellow Taoist Sunreach, does the ancient record mention the ancient sealing formation or the method to destroy the calamity that lies beneath it?" Master Sunreach solemnly said, "Although the record mentioned that the seal was extremely important and was our eternal responsibility to guard it, the record didn't mention any specific details. Fortunately, it did mention the rough composition of the sealing formation. After we gathered a small group of spell formation masters and spent several years in research, we found a method to restore the spell formation." Wei Wuya then added on, "But not only does this method require a large number of high-grade cultivators, it also requires a single person to enter the depths of the devilish chi and place a formation plate at a certain place. This was why we wished to find fellow Taoist Han. Only fellow Taoist Han's divine devil-bane lightning will be able to prevent the devilish chi from corrupting your body." When Han Li heard this, he frowned. But after a moment, he asked with a relaxed expression, "It seems you've been researching this method for a while, but I've only recently returned to the Drifting Cloud sect. How did you plan on placing down the formation plate in the depths of the devilish chi while I was still missing?" When Wei Wuya and Master Sunreach heard this, they couldn't help but exchange a glance. "It seems we can't conceal anything from you," Master Sunreach said with a smile. "We did originally gather many mighty devil-warding treasures and had them placed on a cultivator who practiced an evil-warding technique. But when we had this cultivator probe the devilish chi, it was far too formidable, and the chances of failure were far too large. There was less than a 50% chance of succeeding. However, it will be different with fellow Taoist Han's divine devil-bane lightning. Since the lightning is renowned to be able to restrain devilish chi, this task should prove easy to you." "So it was like that." Han Li faintly smiled, and then with bright eyes he said, "It is true that this task should prove to be easiest for me out of everyone in the heavenly south, but before that, I'd like to take a look at the fearsomeness of the endless devilish chi. I don't wish to do something that is bound to fail. This is only natural. As of current, Devil Conquered is keeping watch over the devilish chi beneath the giant whirlpool. It would be better for you to take a look now. After all, the sooner the devilish chi can be sealed, the better it will be." Master Sunreach agreed without thought. Wei Wuya also nodded and raised no objections. When Han Li saw this, he felt somewhat at ease. Since this matter didn't seem to be a trap, there most likely shouldn't be a problem. The three then immediately departed from Master Sunreach's cave residence and directly headed west towards the direction of the giant whirlpool. After flying for over 50 kilometers, they eventually arrived over an area of sea covered in a mist of white light that have a large cloud of rainbow light swirling above it in the sky, appearing like an upside-down whirlpool. There was an almost indiscernible and odd connection between the white mist and rainbow cloud. When Han Li saw this, a trace of astonishment appeared on his face. With his spiritual sense, he was able to sense that both the mist and rainbow light contained large quantities of pure spiritual chi. This exceeded what a top-grade spirit vein could produce. "So this is the giant whirlpool," Han Li muttered. Master Sunreach pointed to an area and said, "That's right. Devil Conquered should currently be on a nearby reef. Let's go and talk to him." Then Han Li swept his spiritual sense in that direction to find a large black-robed man sitting 5 kilometers away. When Han Li released his spiritual sense, Devil Conquered suddenly opened his eyes and coldly looked in Han Li's direction before standing up. Then his body blurred and he appeared in the air. At that moment, Han Li and the others were already flying over. When Master Sunreach grew closer, he stopped and happily called out, "Fellow Taoist Conquered, fellow Taoist Han has arrived. It seems we'll be able to soon restore the sealing spell formation." "Oh, it is good that fellow Taoist Han has agreed to help us. With the divine devil-bane lightning, he will be sure to instantly succeed." Devil Conquered didn't smile and simply looked at Han Li with a cold disregard. Han Li was a bit surprised to see this, but when he thought about the matter, he couldn't help but smile. As the divine devil-bane lightning was specialized in restraining devilish chi, it would also prove devastating to cultivators practicing devilish arts. Given that Devil Conquered was the top cultivator of the Devil Dao, this wasn't a matter that could be happily accepted. Master Sunreach's amiable meeting with him was most likely to prevent Devil Conquered from showing him any hostility. Han Li inwardly shook his head. Although he felt somewhat gloomy over the matter, he didn't take it to heart. With his current cultivation, even if Devil Conquered attempted to kill him, he'll have more than enough power to defend himself. However, Han Li strongly believed that Devil Conquered wouldn't be prone to do something so foolish in the first place. When Wei Wuya informed Devil Conquered that Han Li was going to take a look at the devilish chi, Devil Conquered simply frowned before nodding in agreement. Then, under the guidance of the three, Han Li headed towards the giant whirlpool. A short moment later, the giant whirlpool clearly entered Han Li's view. The whirlpool was about a kilometer wide, and strangely enough, it didn't splash with sea water, but rather emitted strands of pure white spirit chi. The resulting spiritual chi gathered into a mist above it and underneath the shining sunlight, making for a beautiful sight. Han Li took a deep breath of the damp sea air and felt his heart shake when he sensed the nearby pure spiritual chi. If it releases this much spiritual chi for each day it existed, it must possess a truly astonishing quantity. Because he wasn't able to see the depths of the whirlpool from up above, Han Li's body glowed with light and he flew to the center of the whirlpool, hoping to take a closer look. But when Han Li arrived above it, he felt a huge attractive force weighing down on his body, forcefully pulling him inside the whirlpool. In his alarm, he had light violently flashed from his body, immediately covering it in a layer of azure light. By relying on his profound cultivation, he was able to immediately stabilize himself. Then, with relief, he looked downward with blue light shining from his eyes. At that moment, the three great cultivators watching Han Li wore an expression of alarm. Wei Wuya turned his head to the side and spoke with a heavy tone. "Brother Sunreach, I recall that my sect's mid-nascent soul elder Ma also flew above the whirlpool, but he dropped over 30 meters before he was able to stabilize himself." "That was reported to me as well," Master Sunreach said with a shocked expression. "The attractive force of the whirlpool is quite strong. Even we were caught off guard and were swayed by it." Wei Wuya clicked his tongue and revealed a trace of admiration. "That's right. In the past, I sensed that fellow Taoist Han's cultivation was a bit strange since it was clearly deeper than ordinary cultivators. Now that he entered mid-nascent soul stage, his magic power has become even purer. I truly don't know what is his primary cultivation art. It is truly fascinating." "This is quite unclear," Master Sunreach hesitantly said. "Although there are top-grade cultivation arts that can greatly increase a cultivator's magic power, they are either incredibly difficult to cultivate or contain some major flaw. It is unknown which kind of cultivation art fellow Taoist Han practices." Devil Conquered remained silent, but his expression turned gloomy. At that moment, Han Li's figure blurred and in flash of azure light, he reappeared at the side of the three great cultivators. Han Li calmly said, "This whirlpool obviously possesses an astonishing spiritual chi and an immensely powerful attractive power. I don't know how deep it is nor what danger lies within. Because of the huge distance and dense spiritual chi, our spiritual sense isn't able to delve deeply. If we wish to monitor the devilish chi, we can only enter its depths to take a look. Although we'll be able to resist the attractive force with some deliberation, it would be best for fellow Taoist Han to use some treasures when we descend. Additionally, there are many small whirlpools down below that will be dangerous if you're dragged inside. How about I go down below with you?" Master Sunreach proposed. Delighted by his offer, Han Li's apprehension completely disappeared. "Then I will have to trouble you. It would be great for you to accompany me." Han Li and Master Sunreach promptly turned into an azure and a white streak of light respectively, disappearing into the whirlpool without a trace. Only Wei Wuya and Devil Conquered remained, and the two silently stared at the whirlpool in complete silence. After some time had passed, Devil Conquered turned his head and asked, "Brother Wei, what do you think about the drifting cloud sect's fellow Taoist Han?" Wei Wuya faintly smiled and slowly replied, "What do I think of him? What do you mean?" Devil Conquered snorted and coldly said, "Why is fellow Taoist Wei asking when you already know the answer? Don't tell me you don't fear what he could become. Since he's already entered mid-nascent soul stage at such a young age and possesses such mighty abilities, by the time he reaches late-nascent soul stage, we will no longer have our current standing in the heavenly south." Wei Wuya glanced at Devil Conquered and mysteriously smiled. "He, my point of view is a bit different from yours." "So you're of a different opinion. You may as well say it. Could it be you have the confidence to suppress him after he reaches late-nascent soul stage?" "Suppress? Why would I want to do that? I'm the oldest of the three great cultivators of the heavenly south. I only have over 100 years more to live before I perish. Even if he were the reincarnation of a true immortal, he wouldn't be able to reach late-nascent soul stage in 100 years. And even if that's the case and he suppresses the entirely heavenly south, what does that have to do with me?" After hearing this, Devil Conquered said, Brother Wei is willing to allow one person to forcibly wrest away the power you took such effort and care to obtain. If you were to make an alliance with me, I may even make a few concessions to you. I'm not interested, Wei Wuya bluntly responded with a smile. Doesn't Brother Concord feel that it is a bit too late to take action? I might be tempted if you made this offer while he was at early nascent soul stage, but now, his abilities are no weaker than ours despite being at the same stage as us. I have no interest in making an enemy of a cultivator on the same level as my own, neither do I wish to doom my sect to disaster. Brother Concord had best remember that existences on our level are very difficult to extinguish. Even with an ambush and assistance, it still won't be enough. Of course, if you were able to create an entrapment similar to what we used to deal with the Elder Devil, that would be a different story. Wei Wuya then added on, but from the way I see it, you should avoid doing any underhanded tricks and provoking his wrath. After all, this person could potentially unify the Heavenly South in the future. Don't forget the mighty deity transformation stage cultivators that had unified the Heavenly South in the past. When Devil Conquered heard him, he sank into thought and said nothing else. Meanwhile, Han Li and Master Sunreach delved about 10 kilometers deep into the whirlpool. Under the heavy pressure of the spiritual chi, the two were unable to quickly fly to the bottom and could only slowly descend. Han Li already took out his blue-lit shield and had it cover his body in a layer of blue light. At that moment, over 30 streaks of golden light began to quickly swirl around his body, taking him even deeper into the whirlpool. As for Master Sunreach, he delved down with ease. By depending on a single white flying sword to revolve around his body, he was able to easily cut through the layers of white spiritual chi in the whirlpool and followed at Han Li's side. Han Li felt a trace of admiration when he saw this. As he expected, late nascent soul eccentrics were unique existences. With that thought, Han Li then swept his surroundings with his spiritual sense. He was only able to spread it about 40 meters below before being repelled, preventing him from seeing any further. As for his bright-sight spirit eyes, they were able to see a little over 100 meters below, but all he saw was white mist. However, his bright-sight spirit eyes would occasionally spot any spiritual chi whirlpools when they appeared, allowing him to avoid them with ease. Of course, Master Sunreach noticed how nimbly Han Li avoided these hidden whirlpools of spiritual chi prior to their appearance, causing him to feel rather impressed and even more strongly about winning Han Li over to his side. As for the possible unification of the Heavenly South under Han Li when he potentially reached late nascent soul stage, Master Sunreach didn't care much for it. If he wasn't mistaken, Han Li was a cultivator who wholeheartedly pursued the heavenly Tao. So long as there was nothing to concern him personally, he would simply continue to silently cultivate, rather than pursue anything that would cause him unnecessary trouble. Were this not the case, Han Li would have seized control over the state of Zai with ease. According to the Righteous Tao's reports on the state of Zai, when Han Li was in early nascent soul stage and later entered mid-nascent soul stage, he didn't reveal any power-hungry tendencies, much to the relief of Master Sunreach. After the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li reckoned that he had already delved over 30 kilometers deep, and he couldn't help but take a look up above. There was a white mist of spiritual chi that he was unable to see through, separating him from the outside world. Given the immense pressure that Han Li's flying swords were subjected to, he reckoned that only mid-nascent soul cultivators were able to sink this deep into the whirlpool. Were it not for the fact that his Azure Essence sword arts provided a deeper magic power than similarly ranked cultivators, he would find the pressure quite strenuous. Just as Han Li sank into his thoughts, Master Sunreach called out to him, "Fellow Taoist Han, we're about to arrive at the bottom, be careful." "Many thanks, Brother Sunreach." Han Li quickly recollected himself and gazed downward. As a result, he saw a blinding white radiance flooding his view as if there were layers upon layers of light below him. When Han Li saw this, he slowed his descent. A short moment later, Han Li and Master Sunreach stopped about 20 meters above the white light barrier. With his bright-sight spirit eyes, Han Li was able to clearly see countless threads of devilish chi squirm. Staring at the light barrier, Han Li muttered, "So this is suppressing the devilish chi. It will prove quite troublesome." Master Sunreach explained, "That's right, the amount of devilish chi has turned it into an abyss. It is unknown how far deep it goes. I won't conceal this from you. My own cultivation art possessed some evil warding properties and I attempted to go in. But I was only able to reach about 300 meters deep before I was unable to further persist. In matters of both its devilish nature and quantity, it isn't something that common cultivators can touch." Devil cultivators that practice ancient devilish arts will have a massive spike in cultivation if they were to touch it, but conversely, their souls will become corrupt and be lost. Han Li nodded as he listened, and stared at the devilish chi behind the light barrier as he silently mulled over the matter. After a short moment of thought, Han Li said, "Brother Sunreach, wait here for a moment. I'm going to take a look and see how formidable this devilish chi is." "Be careful, Brother Han." Master Sunreach wasn't surprised in the slightest by Han Li's action. Han Li didn't say anything further, and his silhouette blurred several times before appearing with the tip of his foot touching the light barrier. Then, a foot-long streak of azure sword chi shot down and instantly pierced through the light barrier and traveled into the devilish chi before disappearing without a trace. Han Li revealed a bit of surprise, but he soon realized something. The light barrier was only effective against devilish chi. He wouldn't need to expend any effort to make an opening through it. With that thought, the golden sword streaks revolving around him began to sing with thunder and began to spark with arcs of golden lightning, creating a giant net of lightning around him. As of current, his understanding and grasp of divine devil-bane lightning have reached a realm beyond comprehension. With his hands forming an incantation gesture, the net of lightning quickly shrank and wrapped around his blue light barrier in the blink of an eye, creating a huge ball of lightning around him. As for his flying swords, they shanked to the size of several inches under his command and quickly flew into his sleeve. With that done, Han Li silently sank through the light barrier and entered the devilish chi without any resistance. Thunder loudly rang out, and black devilish chi began to lash out around him. But the rings of thunder dispersed the devilish chi as they continuously swarmed around him. Han Li made no immediate movements. He simply stood in place as he observed the divine devil-bane lightning disperse the clouds of devilish chi. As a result, the devilish chi quickly restored its original form and rushed around him once more. Han Li frowned, and his heart sank after he saw the rate at which the divine devil-bane lightning was being consumed. He tilted his head in thought before delving deeper into the devilish chi. As of current, Han Li had no mind to spread his spiritual sense past the light barrier. The concentrated devilish essence of the chi below could corrupt a cultivator's spiritual sense, inflicting immense harm on anyone foolish enough to do so. His only option for the time being was to use the bright-sight spirit eyes to gaze into the pitch-black depths. However, they were only able to look about 10 meters deep before he could see no more. After sinking about 600 meters deep, Han Li paused and looked around him. Then a short moment later, he immediately returned up. When Master Sunreach saw Han Li appear, he smiled at him and said, "The divine devil-bane lightning is clearly powerful. You were able to stay inside for such a large period of time without the slightest damage. It is deserving of its grand reputation." "It wasn't much," Han Li calmly replied. "Since the devilish chi isn't under anyone's control, it is easily scattered. Let's return and have the discussion up above." Master Sunreach promptly nodded in agreement. Then, Han Li withdrew his golden lightning and summoned his flying sword before flying back to the surface. When the two arrived at the surface, Wei Wuya calmly asked them, "How was it? With fellow Taoist hands divine devil-bane lightning, you should be free to move inside the devilish chi." After a moment of thought, Han Li answered, "I already gave it a try, but before I agree, I have to first ask you where you want the formation plate. If the location is too deep inside the devilish chi, I fear that my divine devil-bane lightning will not be able to last." Devil Conquered then proposed, "Let us return to the cave residence to discuss the specific location. The formation plate is still in the hands of those formation masters. Let us first go retrieve the plate and then have the discussion then. After all, the formation plate wasn't easily created, so we cannot lose it in the process." The others raised no objections to Devil Conquered's suggestion to move the discussion elsewhere, and the group headed towards Spirit Turtle Island. Han Li asked Master Sunreach for a sealed room to spend the night meditating as they waited for the other two to retrieve the formation plate from the spell formation masters. Then, on the morning of the next day, Han Li received a sound transmission talisman from Master Sunreach and promptly appeared at the main hall. Han Li walked in with a raised brow, noticing that the three great cultivators were already seated and talking to one another. When Wei Wuya saw Han Li arrive, he called out to him and summoned a faint red jade slip on the table with a flip of his hand. "Fellow Taoist Han, please take a seat. This is the location that you must place the formation plate according to our research of the ceiling formation." "Oh, let me take a look." With a wave, the jade slip shot into his hand, and then he took a seat before immersing his spiritual sense into it. A short moment later, Han Li's face stirred, and he withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip, wearing a gloomy expression on his face. Han Li tossed the jade slip back on the table and raised his head, coldly saying, "Fellow Taoists, do you plan on having me go on a one-way journey to place the formation plate so deep into the abyss?" Devil Conquered calmly replied, "How can fellow Taoist Han say that? Although the location for the formation plate is a bit deep, with the divine devil bane lightning protecting you, it shouldn't pose a problem." "Is that so?" Han Li glanced at Devil Conquered and said with an angry tone, "Does Brother Conquered believe my reserves of divine devil bane lightning are infinite? Or do you simply wish for me to not return after I place down the formation plate?" "You mean to say that you don't have enough divine devil bane lightning to last the trip back?" Wei Wuya asked with a frown. "From what I remember, fellow Taoist Han controlled quite a large quantity of lightning during his battle with the Elder Devil. It shouldn't pose much of a problem." "Could it be that you didn't delve too far deep into the devilish qi?" Han Li asked with an odd expression. "Yi," Wei Wuya yelped, "fellow Taoist Han means to say." Devil Conquered's eyes flickered, but he remained silent. As for Master Sunreach, he lowered his head in thought. Han Li knitted his fingers together and held them at his chest before he explained with an indifferent tone. "At a certain depth, it is clear to see that the devilish nature of the qi becomes even stronger, and it exhausts the divine devil bane lightning at a greater speed. I've reached this conclusion after delving a kilometer deep into the abyss. Although I do possess a bit of divine devil bane lightning, I will not be able to delve 10 kilometers deep into the devilish qi and make it back." Wei Wuya tensely frowned and turned to Master Sunreach, asking, "So it was like that? Brother Sunreach, you delved the deepest into the devilish qi out of the three of us. Is this true?" "It's true," Master Sunreach sighed and nodded in agreement. "When I delved deeper into the devilish qi using my secret techniques, I felt my magic power drain at a faster rate. I originally believed that Han Li wouldn't notice and was thinking about warning him." When Devil Conquered heard this, his expression changed and he said, "In that case, our original plan to have a cultivator enter the devilish qi depths with devil-warding treasures would fail. Although they would be safe at the beginning, there is danger of becoming corrupted once they delve too deep." "That's right," Master Sunreach said with a wry smile. "That's why I wasn't very interested in that plan. But since fellow Taoist Han was still missing at the time, I didn't raise any objections as there were no other alternatives." Han Li observed their tone of voice and expressions with indifference, but he grew somewhat gloomy. He was unable to tell whether the three truly knew of it or if they decided to keep the matter hidden. Regardless, he wouldn't easily agree to them. Then the room was filled with silence. It was clear that it would be a death sentence to have someone place a formation plate this deep in the depths of the devilish qi. Telling Han Li to do it for a virtuous cause would be an even less likely matter. Although the four present realized that half the heavenly south would be affected by the release of the devilish qi, none of them were interested in sacrificing themselves in preventing this, as they already cultivated to such a high stage. If worst came to worst, they would flee from the heavenly south altogether. They will be able to easily find a place for themselves in the world with their level of cultivation. And apart from Han Li, there was no one else that could delve deep enough to place the formation plate, causing the three great cultivators to look at each other in dismay. Then Han Li's eyes wandered for a moment before speaking with a relaxed voice. "I am also aware that this matter is quite serious and that you all find yourselves facing a dilemma. As such, I have an idea I wish to try." When Master Sunreach heard this, he hastily said, "What's your idea? Please tell us." Wei Wuya and Devil Conquered felt the spirits roused and hastily turned to Han Li. "It's rather simple. I believe I am able to reach the designated location for the formation plate with the divine devil bane lightning, but I will not have enough to safely return. As such, you will need to hand over the devil-warding treasures you've gathered over to me so that I will last longer in the devilish qi. However, since this method does pose quite a bit of danger to me." With that said, Han Li paused as if hesitant to continue. With joy on his face, Wei Wuya hastily said, "That will be no problem. So long as you can place down the formation plate, we'll lend fellow Taoist Han all of the devil-warding treasures we've acquired. Of course, we won't have you brave this grave danger for nothing." Master Sunreach suddenly smiled at Devil Conquered and said, "Brother Conquered, what do you say?" Devil Conquered was stunned when he heard this, but after some hesitation he nodded. "Indeed, if you accomplish this, we plan on handing over one of these islands over to fellow Taoist Han." "You would present one of the islands to me?" Han Li's narrowed his eyes. "That's right," Master Sunreach said with a friendly voice. To tell the truth, we planned on dividing the islands between 7 great sects, but a majority of those sects belong to our 3 superpowers. There is one island that is difficult to divide. We originally planned on handing it over to fellow Taoists Long Han and Feng Bing, but it turned out that the two are in seclusion. As such, we've decided to hand it over to a small, unremarkable sect. Now that fellow Taoist Han is here to brave the danger, we will hand over the island to your drifting cloud sect. Surely no will raise any complaints over this. Is that so? Han Li said with amazement. After all, from what he heard, not only did the islands have outstanding spirit veins, but they also have several rich spirit stone mines and other rarities. After some thought, Han Li then worriedly asked, since the 7 islands were a section of the Grand Formation, won't they sink back into the ocean when the formation is restored? Don't worry, Wei Wuya answered. The method we're using to restore the formation differs from the original used to create the sealing formation. Naturally, we won't waste the islands by having them sink back into the ocean, and the cultivators occupying the islands will also be duty-bound to look after the sealing formation. After muttering to himself, Han Li replied, since you 3 have made such heavy promises, I'll have to give it a try, but after this matter is settled, I don't wish to be further involved in this. Wei Wuya heartily laughed and agreed. Placing the formation plate is already considered a great service. Leave the rest to us. Although Master Sunreach and Devil Conquered both had different ideas originally, they grew at ease for the time being. At that moment, Wei Wuya took out a white circular object from his storage pouch and handed it over to Han Li. Han Li took a glance at it. It was a palm-sized formation plate that was meticulously carved from white jade. It flickered with spiritual light and was engraved with several complex talisman characters. Han Li's hand glowed with azure light for a moment, transferring it into his storage pouch in the blink of an eye. All right, now everything is ready except for one last thing, Wei Wuya said with a pleased expression. When does Brother Han plan on taking action? Naturally, the quicker the better, Han Li grimly answered. I already rested the night and restored the magic power I earlier consumed. If you fellow Taoists have the devil-warding treasures on hand, I will place the formation plate right away. Who knows what could happen to the devilish chi if we delay? The 3 great cultivators raised no objections to Han Li's suggestion. As for the devil-warding treasures they managed to difficultly acquire, they all carried them on hand and each took them out, giving them all to Han Li. A jade scepter with a flood dragon head, a fire-red trigram mirror, a set of sparkling gold armor, and a small black flag. Han Li promptly tested the efficacy of the 4 treasures and found that they were exceptional. 3 of the treasures were Yang Flame treasures and would prove very useful in dealing with the devilish chi. As for the black flag, it was a famous Devil Dao treasure. According to Devil Conquered, the flag was originally used to ghostly yin winds, but it is also capable of absorbing devilish chi. Han Li looked at the flag with doubt and fiddled with it before finally placing it in his storage pouch, much to the shock of Devil Conquered. After Han Li put away the treasures, the cultivators left Master Sunreach's cave residence and head out in the direction of the giant whirlpool. 4 hours later, Han Li appeared alone at the bottom of the whirlpool. When Han Li looked at the devilish chi below the light barrier, he silently made a fist and thunder rang out, instantly covering his body in several dense arcs of golden lightning, weaving a net of lightning around his light barrier. As Han Li looked at the golden lightning, his mouth twitched, forming a trace of ridicule. Despite how cunning the 3 great cultivators were, they couldn't have imagined that he originally possessed 72 flying swords created from gold lightning bamboo. According to his estimates, he would have enough to make 2 trips and still have enough to spare. This task didn't pose the slightest danger to him at all. On one hand, he had done this to haggle over the rewards as Master Sunreach had previously informed him that there were possible benefits. On the other hand, he had done this to avoid the 3 from realizing how much divine Devilbane lightning he possessed. In the future, the only things that could pose a threat against Han Li in the Heavenly South would be the 3 great cultivators and the Mulan divine sages. He had no choice but to deceive them. The strongest cultivator pair in the Heavenly Tao Alliance. They are mid-nascent soul stage Tao companion that can match a late-nascent soul cultivator when joined together. Like the last time Han Li delved into the abyss of devilish chi, he was protected in a net of divine Devilbane lightning. Soon, the rings of thunder grew softer as he delved deeper, and soon the golden lightning could no longer be seen. On the surface of the ocean, the 3 great cultivators were talking with one another as Han Li delved deeper. Brother Sunreach, Do you feel that fellow Taoist Han truly doesn't have enough divine devil-bane lightning to make the entire trip? Will his lightning be consumed too quickly to have any remaining for the trip back? Wei Wuya asked with his hands behind his back. Does Brother Wei mean to say that my previous words were false? Master Sunreach's expression sank and he appeared displeased. Wei Wuya chuckled and said, "Please don't misunderstand me. I didn't mean that at all. I simply asked because I felt that fellow Taoist Han agreed far too easily." Master Sunreach's expression relaxed and he said, "If that's the case, I'm not too sure myself. However, I consumed greater amounts of magic power the deeper I delved into the abyss of devilish chi. I imagine one would need an astonishing amount of divine devil-bane lightning if they wished to make a whole round trip. I don't believe fellow Taoist Han can accomplish this with his lightning alone. Perhaps he has something else that can withstand the devilish chi for a time." That is quite possible. After all, there are an endless number of mysteries and wonders in the cultivation world. But regardless of how it is said, it will be good if this calamity could be smoothly resolved. Wei Wuya spoke with a smile and took a glance at Devil Conquered. The large black-robed man had his arms crossed as he glanced down at the whirlpool, his face emotionless as he remained silent. For the time being, silence filled the air. 10 kilometers deep into the devilish chi, a light barrier surging with golden lightning was floating motionlessly. Han Li was inside it, solemnly reading through the jade slip that detailed where the formation plate should be placed. A short moment later, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and looked around. His surroundings were completely devoid of light, not surprising as he already reached the farthest depths of the devilish chi abyss. Han Li frowned and opened his mouth, spitting out an inch-long golden sword. In a flicker of golden light, the small sword flew out of the light barrier with a layer of thin lightning covering the body of the blade. It circled around him before revolving above his head, turning into a strange inch-large golden ring of light. Han Li formed an incantation gesture and pointed at the ring of light above his head, ordering it to suddenly stop and shoot out in a streak of golden light. He then closely followed after it in a blur. He flew a meter across the abyss before the small golden sword suddenly shot downward and released a muffled bang. The flying sword had pierced into something. A trace of joy appeared on Han Li's face and arrived 3 meters above where the sword had landed. In the pitch-black darkness, all he could see was the faint light of the small sword flickering with lightning. It had pierced into a huge flat rock. Han Li muttered to himself for a moment and pressed one of his hands against his light barrier. The net of lightning surrounding the barrier suddenly surged with blinding light and released several dense bolts of golden lightning that quickly revolved in the nearby area, turning into several golden pythons. As a result, the golden pythons cleanly swept away all the devilish chi in the nearby area, illuminating the huge rock underneath. Han Li examined it for a moment and revealed shock. This wasn't a rock, but rather the floor of an altar. It appeared to stretch beyond the range of the golden lightning. He was amazed. The area that the formation masters wished to bury the formation plate was unexpectedly remarkable. Han Li commanded the golden pythons to quickly envelop the rest of the altar, revealing its general appearance. It was a square building that stretched out about 100 meters. All of the characteristics and engravings on the stone walls illustrated that it was a building created by cultivators from antiquity. After Han Li viewed his surroundings, he waved to the sword embedded in the floor, and it returned to his sleeve in a golden streak. He then flew towards the center of the building, and after a short moment, it began to flicker with white light. His heart stirred at the sight and he sped up, eventually clearly seeing what laid at its center. It was a shattered stone tablet. Only a small portion of its foundation remained standing upright with the rest of its fragments scattered around. Han Li's eyes wandered around the stone tablet as he observed it. Although it was shattered, he was able to see a few worn talisman characters that he couldn't understand. It was unknown what kind of material it was carved from, as it would only occasionally sparkle with a faint white light. Could it be a rare material on par with the gold lightning bamboo? Han Li thought. Soon, he reached out towards a fist-sized piece of the stone tablet, and his hand glowed with azure light before summoning it into his grasp. The stone piece was gray and unremarkable. If it weren't for the traces of spiritual light, Han Li wouldn't have found anything particular about it. Han Li looked at it several more times, and his brow stirred before he suddenly exerted great strength into his grasp. As a result, a strange scene occurred. The stone wasn't crushed to powder as Han Li thought. Instead, it flickered with white light and suddenly turned soft, allowing his fingers to sink deep into the stone. Han Li felt his heart jump. He frowned and asked Monarch's soul divergence, Senior Soul Divergence, do you know what this is? No, I've never seen it before, Monarch Soul Divergence said with a lazy tone, but this is no surprise. There were so many rare materials used during ancient times, it is impossible for someone to know them all. You may as well let me research that piece. I'm idle and have little better to do. Then, without another thought, Hanli tossed the stone piece into the bamboo tube behind him. Light flashed from the bamboo tube, and a mist of white light sucked the strange stone inside of it. Hanli quickly turned his attention to the shattered stone tablet. It hadn't been long since it was shattered, and it appeared that, when the spell formation was damaged, the stone tablet had shattered as well. With that thought, Hanli collected the rest of the stone fragments in a sweep of azure light. He then flicked his fingers and launched over 10 streaks of azure sword light at the stone foundation, wishing to take the rest of it with him. A series of booms sounded out, and to Hanli's surprise, the sword chi wasn't able to cut through the stone. It didn't seem to have any effect. How strange! Hanli yelped in alarm and hesitated for a moment. He no longer paid attention to the rest of the stone tablet and launched several streaks of sword chi in a different direction. Although he had enough divine devilbane lightning to sustain for a while longer, Hanli didn't dare to linger too long in such a dangerous place, and began to place down the formation plate. A series of muffled explosions sounded out, followed by the appearance of a 3-meter-deep hole at the side of the stone tablet. With a wave of his hand, white light flickered and an exquisite formation plate appeared. Hanli shook his hand without the slightest hesitation and sent the formation plate into the hole in a streak of light. Grimly staring at the formation plate, his two hands then formed a hand incantation, and the formation plate began to shine with even greater light. Soon the formation plate released a clear ring, and a thick beam of white light shot out towards the sky, only to disappear without a trace. Hanli felt at ease. Since the formation plate was functioning as expected, he had clearly found the right place. With that thought, Hanli swept up an azure gale with a wave of his sleeve, completely burying the hole with rocks. He then released a spell seal and muttered an incantation before melting the pile of rocks to seal the hole completely in a smooth layer. The hole now appeared as if it never existed. Hanli walked around the large hole to make sure that nothing appeared out of the ordinary, and he nodded with a satisfied expression. With that done, he released several spell seals, striking the nearby golden lightning pythons. With pangs of thunder, the lightning pythons faded away into specks of light, and the devilish chi began to quickly roil as there was no longer anything holding it back. Hanli pondered to himself before the lightning flashed around his light barrier, preparing to rush back up to the ocean's surface. At that moment, Monarch Soul Divergence's voice echoed through his spiritual sense. "Youngster, wait a moment." Hanli stopped in surprise and asked, "What does Senior have to say?" Since this is the center of the ceiling formation, it is also the densest area of devilish chi, and since it has been suppressed since ancient times, it is possible several devil essence diamonds have formed here. According to ancient records, they were a material used to refine precious devil Dao treasures. You should see if you can find them nearby. Devil essence diamonds. An odd expression appeared on his face. Then, after some thought, he slapped his storage pouch and took out a yellow jade scepter with a wolf's head. This was the ancient treasure that originally housed Silvermoon. Although its artifact spirit was missing, it was still capable of using simple earth movement techniques, but not to the superb skill that Silvermoon was capable of. With a soft shout, Hanli's light barrier doubled in size, and a streak of white light flew out from his sleeve. It circled around him and turned into a small white fox. "Since time is limited, let's split up to find the devil essence diamonds." Hanli quickly spoke and tossed a ball of golden lightning towards the small fox. With a ring of thunder, the ball of lightning wrapped around the fox in a net. "Keep in mind that the lightning will not last long," Hanli solemnly warned. "Once it shows signs of weakening, immediately return and then we'll head back up." "Yes, Master," Silvermoon replied in her usual bright voice. "However, I do not know what devil essence diamonds look like." Before Hanli could reply, Monarch Soul Divergence answered, "Devil essence diamonds are pitch-black gems that contain astonishing devilish chi. They will be easily recognized." "That will do then. I'm heading off." Silvermoon nodded and her fox body flashed with silver light before disappearing into the ground. Hanli didn't remain still either. With a wave of the jade scepter, a layer of yellow light appeared around his light barrier, and he sank into the floor without a trace. For a time, no one could be seen above ground. Time slowly passed by and the platform was completely quiet, but was now shrouded in pitch-black devilish chi. The endless darkness resembled what one would imagine of the underworld. Not long after, golden light flashed as Han Li emerged from the ground. He looked around him, and a trace of worry appeared on his face when he saw that Silvermoon wasn't there. Then he turned his attention to his hand and relaxed his grasp, revealing an exquisite pitch-black gem. It appeared to be the size of his thumb. Monarch Soul Divergence chuckled and said, "As I expected, there are truly Devil Essence diamonds here. Your luck is quite good." This was an item that ancient Devil Dao cultivators could only dream of. It was incredibly rare even during times of antiquity. "Is that so? This item is so precious." Han Li took a closer look at the gem and narrowed his eyes to examine it. The gem didn't shine with even the slightest light. Instead, its serene darkness gave a bewildering sensation to Han Li, as if his consciousness was being sucked inside it. Han Li felt his heart tremble and quickly withdrew his gaze, not daring to look any longer. At that moment, silver light shined from underneath him. A silver fox wrapped in faint golden light shot out from the ground and quickly entered Han Li's light barrier. "If you took any longer, I was going to personally come and find you. I expected that you would have returned earlier than I did. Could it be that you found something?" With a wave of his hand, he swept up the small fox into his arm. Without saying a word, Silvermoon spat out 3 pitch-black gems, undoubtedly Devil Essence diamonds. "Good, good." Delight appeared on Han Li's face, and Silvermoon gave what appeared to be a smile before disappearing into his sleeve. Han Li took the 3 gems along with his own and placed them into a single jade box. "We can't stay any longer," Han Li muttered. Soon, the golden lightning around him trembled and a large boom sounded out. He began to slowly rise to the surface. Han Li's speed was slow throughout his ascent. After a quarter hour, he finally arrived at the barrier of white light. During his entire journey, he hadn't made use of any of the devil warding treasures that the 3 great cultivators had given him. Han Li eventually passed through the light barrier, suppressing the devilish chi, and withdrew his divine devilbane lightning entirely. But then, Han Li didn't immediately return to the surface. Instead, he looked down and slapped his storage pouch, taking out a damaged dark green flag. Silvermoon yelped and said with amazement, Isn't this the ghost-sifting banner?" Appears in chapter 789, when Han Li fights against the devil cultivator, that cursed Nangong Wan. Although the devil heads and yin ghosts attached to the banner were cleanly destroyed, the banner itself is a rare Devil Dao treasure and is still intact. From what I've heard, it is able to absorb ghost chi in order to restore itself. Devil Conquered's flag had reminded me of this. Devilish and ghostly chi are both worldly yin chi and have a certain level of similarity, and given the pure devilish chi here, it is perfect to test whether or not the flag can be restored. "It doesn't matter if it fails." Han Li spoke calmly and blue light began to brightly glow around his hands, wrapping around the small flag. Afterwards, the flag flew into the devilish chi in an azure streak. The ghost-sifting banner was engulfed by the countless threads of devilish chi, and the azure light surrounding it was cleanly devoured. When Han Li saw this, he grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and pointed at the green flag below. The lifeless ghost-sifting banner suddenly glowed with green light, and it violently grew under Han Li's command. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a torn 3-meter-tall banner. It appeared to still be damaged from its battle against the Oriate Sword formation. When Han Li sifted through the consciousness of the Yin-sifting sect elder, he also acquired the method to control the banner. This and the many other banners of its kind were legacy treasures passed through many generations of the Yin-sifting sect. Of course, this meant that the banner didn't require blood to recognize a master. Although it was classified as a magic treasure, it could be used by anyone after some refinement. Han Li chanted an incantation at that moment, and a meter-large hole suddenly appeared in front of the flag, containing gusts of yin wines within it. Then, the dense devilish chi that gathered around quickly streamed into the hole at a violent speed. Han Li rejoiced at the sight. The banner was able to absorb the devilish chi as he expected. As the banner absorbed the chi, it began to restore itself at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. Not long after, the banner appeared to be in flawless condition, but its original green color was now tainted black. Han Li's eyes wandered across the banner as it consumed the devilish chi all around it. He was somewhat surprised that it continued to absorb the devilish chi after restoring itself. He didn't expect for it to consume the chi like a bottomless pit. In addition, he discovered that the more devilish chi it absorbed, the more black light began to cover the green parts of the banner. When Han Li saw this, a trace of surprise appeared on his face, but he continued to calmly observe this from a distance. After an unknown amount of time had passed, the ghost-sifting banner finally released a series of hums, and the hole it summoned in front of it disappeared. The banner was now entirely covered in dazzling black light. At that moment, Han Li pointed at the black banner, and it quickly shrank back to its original size. It then shot up in a black streak of light and entered Han Li's grasp. Han Li quickly examined the banner in his hand and nodded with satisfaction before putting it away. In the future, he would have to find an opportunity to test its might. Because he had tarried for too long, Han Li didn't dare to delay any further and promptly had his tens of flying swords revolve around him, breaking through the dense spiritual chi above him, allowing him to ascend to the surface. As the three great cultivators waited above the whirlpool, they appeared calm, but their expressions betrayed a slight trace of fear, as if worried that Han Li had failed in his task. But then, Han Li shot out from the whirlpool in a streak of azure light, and they all felt great relief at the sight. "Fellow Taoist Han, how did it go? Did you succeed?" Master Sunreach beamingly asked. "I've fulfilled my task. The formation plate is securely placed," Han Li replied with a smile. "Good. Allow me to test it." Wei Wuya summoned a formation plate identical to the one Han Li buried before slapping his storage pouch. He held the formation plate in one hand and formed a hand gesture with the other. Then, he muttered a cryptic incantation, and the formation plate in his hand began to shine with white light, releasing threads of rainbow light in a gorgeous display. "Good," Wei Wuya said with a friendly grin. "You've properly installed the formation plate. We can immediately send invitations to the other cultivators to come and restore the spell formation. With the formation plate set down, we won't need to worry about the devilish chi suddenly bursting. We owe much to fellow Taoist Han's achievement. Since the matter is settled, I must bid my farewell. I have a few important matters to handle. I'll return these treasures to you." After this was said, Han Li returned the 4 devil-warding treasures to the 3 cultivators. The 3 great cultivators received the treasures and couldn't help but look at each other with dismay at Han Li's wish to suddenly depart. "There is no need for fellow Taoist Han to be so impatient," Master Sunreach urged. "How about he stays at our 7 Spirit Islands for a few days?" "Many thanks for Brother Sunreach's kindness, but I cannot afford to delay these affairs." Han Li shook his head, his face revealing a trace of regret. "Since Brother Han has urgent matters occupying him, we won't keep you here any longer. Have a smooth journey." Wei Wuya sent him off with a salute. "Then I will take my leave." Han Li then cupped his fist to the 3 cultivators and covered his body in blinding azure light before brilliantly streaking across the sky. Half a month later, Han Li returned to the Drifting Cloud sect. After informing his senior martial brothers about the spirit island that was given to the sect, he prepared to enter seclusion. This time, Han Li wasn't cultivating magic power but completing the refinement of his second nascent soul. Not only would this greatly expand his abilities, but it would also grant him another life. What was originally the wood spirit nascent had now reached the stage of assimilation and was on the verge of becoming his second nascent soul in entirety. Of course, Han Li first observed Nangong Wan's condition before entering seclusion for a few years. After experiencing several grand events recently, the heavenly South cultivation world had finally entered another period of peace, and the many sects and clans took the opportunity to nurture their disciples and hone their strength. 4 years after Han Li entered seclusion, Silvermoon was in her human form respectfully waiting outside the sealed seclusion room. On the day before, she received a voice transmission from Han Li while she was nurturing the spirit medicines with the green liquid, and she was now waiting on Han Li to emerge from the room. She didn't have to wait for long. The stone door eventually began to groan and slowly open. However, when she raised her head and gazed inside, she didn't catch sight of Han Li. Instead, she saw a black yin wind that suddenly blew out from the room. Then, with a muffled chuckle, the 3-meter-large black cloud made its way towards Silvermoon. Silvermoon paled and took several steps back in her alarm as she looked at the black cloud in shock. Then the black cloud came to a sudden stop and softly shined with light as if made from black silk. Silvermoon's mind began to stir. The black cloud suddenly condensed into an inch-large black-green nascent soul, and it said, "How is it? It should be considered a success for my second nascent soul to have reached this stage. Congratulations on Master's achievement." Silvermoon sweetly smiled and curtsied at the nascent soul. Apart from the nascent soul's slightly smaller size, it appeared exactly the same as his original. A familiar voice sounded out. "It has come as a surprise that I was able to complete my second nascent soul so quickly. However, it does feel a bit strange now that it's done. Han Li then walked out from the secluded room. At that moment, the black-green nascent soul grinned before flying a circle around Han Li and landing on his head. Silvermoon took a good look at Han Li and smiled. It is only natural to feel a bit odd after acquiring a second nascent soul, but with a bit of time, Master should become accustomed to it. Oh, from your tone of voice, it seems you know something about having a second nascent soul. Did you remember something? Han Li curiously asked. After a pause, Silvermoon answered, "It isn't very clear to me. I don't know why I said it. Perhaps I knew about a similar technique in the past." Han Li nodded when he heard her explanation and said nothing else. Then, the nascent soul sitting on his head summoned a small flag with a wave of its hand and began to play with it. It was the ghost-sifting banner that had absorbed the devilish chi. When Silvermoon saw this, she couldn't help but look at the nascent soul in surprise, asking, "Could it be that your second nascent soul cultivates a devil Dao art?" It is only natural that the second nascent soul should cultivate something exceptional, but it cannot cultivate a new technique alone since it doesn't have its own body yet, so I am using my own body and the ghost-sifting banner's devilish chi to have it cultivate a few of the profound yin art transformation techniques. As for whether or not I will grant it a body, I've yet to decide, Han Li said with a frown. Once it has its own body, there is a possibility of backlash and betrayal. I must be careful about it. He then patted his head, and in a flash of black light, the nascent soul entered his skull without a trace. Han Li's spiritual sense allowed him to clearly see within him. Both his main and second nascent soul were sitting cross-legged across from one another in his dantian and were meditating. Silvermoon tilted her head and said, "It is right for Master to be cautious. I've never heard of the profound nascent formation arts before, and other cultivation incarnation techniques are generally a division of attention. As for higher-grade incarnation techniques such as the Mulan Divine Sage Zhang's, they are grand abilities that are employed through a forceful division of your primal soul. Their incarnation techniques don't make them stronger. They are only either for survival or producing superior numbers, but they can be considered formidable techniques regardless. All right, enough of that for now. Did anything happen while I was in seclusion?" Once that was said, he beckoned to Silvermoon and walked into the main hall. Silvermoon closely followed after him with soft steps and said, "A year after Master entered seclusion, Lady Mew succeeded in her core formation. As per your instructions, I gave the copulation essence arts to her along with some medicine pills suitable for a core formation stage cultivator. As for Lady Nangong, she remains safe within the restricted area while the demon beast core is further weakening the soul seal curse day by day. I reckon that even without the curse's removal method, it should be dissolved in another 100 years. Of course, that is simply my own speculations. Master should go have a look for himself." And Li rejoiced after hearing the good news, but just as he was about to ask about other matters, Silvermoon added, "There is also one other thing I must report to Master. The six-winged frost centipedes have been continuously fed the rainbow skirt grass over the years. They should have grown and laid eggs, but for some unknown reason, their growth had slowed to a standstill, having only molted once and showing no further signs of reproduction." Molted. When Han Li heard this, he stopped walking and revealed an odd expression. Silvermoon bit her lip and slowed her steps. "That's right. After they molted, they became far more powerful. Additionally, they became irritable as if they were about to molt once more." "Let me take a look at them." Han Li frowned and then changed direction, walking towards the passage that led to the insect rooms. A short moment later, Han Li had arrived. He walked towards one of the insect rooms and looked inside. Before he could clearly see the centipedes, he felt a gust of glacial chi that blew past him. All he saw was a thick layer of sparkling ice covering the entire insect room. There were also several various-sized mounds of ice with thick holes dug into them. Half-feet-long snow-white streaks were currently roaming around them. Having already imprinted Han Li as their master with his blood, they immediately recognized him when he appeared. They grew restless and immediately pounced in Han Li's direction, grabbing onto the walls closest to him. With a wave of his hand, Han Li opened the restriction to the room with a mental command. Several inch-large masses of white light floated towards him. He nimbly grabbed one of them with his hand and brought it to his face. It was a larva with a skin completely snow-white. Apart from the two small protrusions from its back, it appeared exactly the same as when he last saw them. Han Li looked at the larva in his hand and muttered to himself for a moment. Silvermoon stood at his side in silence. At that moment, Han Li extended his finger and brought it to the larva's mouth. With a crackle, blue flame appeared on his fingertip. The centipede larva opened its mouth and spat out a thin thread of glacial chi towards the blue flame. Suddenly, the blue flame surged several times its size before being completely wrapped by the chi. Han Li then slowly closed his eyes as if attempting to sense something. It seems your words held true. They have become far more powerful after they molted. There isn't much difference between reproduction by cannibalism and continuous molting. Han Li opened his eyes and then vanished the blue flame with a flick of his finger. It doesn't come as a great surprise why they aren't continuing to devour one another, Han Li continued. These ancient insects are all fantastical oddities. Perhaps they are only able to reproduce several times, or if the rainbow skirt grass simply causes changes in their body. In any case, it is no problem as long as we can further mature them with the green liquid. Master's words come as a relief. Silvermoon sighed and then sweetly smiled, displaying a bewitching charm. And Lee ignored this and instead made his way to the main hall as he sullenly said, "During my seclusion, I've become well rested. Let's make the trip to the great Jin Empire. Whether it be to dispel the baleful chi present on my body or find rare materials, the journey is absolutely necessary. And regardless of how effective the ancient flame toad's demon core is at dissolving the soul seal curse, I'm still worried of something unexpected happening to Wanner. It is best that I pay a visit to the Yin sifting sect and find the incantation to dissolve the curse. I've also already cultivated a second nascent soul to brave any dangers that I may find in the great Jin." So it was like that, but with Master's abilities there should be seldom few cultivators capable to matching him, Silvermoon said with a smile. There are many miraculous and fantastical treasures in the cultivation world. There is nothing that is certain. Also, I am already at odds with the Devil Dao cultivators of the Yin sifting sects. If they discover that I've arrived, there is certain to be trouble. It is better to tread on the side of caution. I'm going to first take a look at how Wanner is doing before going to see Senior Marshal Brother Cheng. Then I will see if I can gather any more of the missing materials for the puppets and Seven Flame fan. If everything goes smoothly, we can set a departure date after half a month." "Yes, Master. I also wish to see what the great Jin is like, as it's renowned to be the holy land of cultivators." Once that was said, the room became quiet once more. Half a month later, an azure streak shot out from the Dreamcloud Mountains and flew south. Not long after, a few well-informed cultivators received information that the Drifting Cloud sect's renowned Elder Han had left the Dreamcloud Mountains to go on a distant journey. The specifics were unknown. It was possible he was roaming the heavenly south or had left it entirely. After the news was spread around, the heavenly south grew restless before growing calm once more. Han Li's departure hadn't been followed by any further events. The Dreamcloud Mountains Ancient Sword Sect and 100 Possibilities Pavilion still treated the Drifting Cloud Sect sincerely and didn't make any moves against them, allowing them to hold the position as the top sect in the state of Zai. As years slowly passed by, cultivators passed away from reaching the end of their lifespan and new characters emerged from the gaps left behind. The cycle of the Heavenly South cultivators began one more. As for Han Li, any trace of him had disappeared from the Heavenly South. For over 100 years, there had been no word of him. One of the Mulan's late nascent soul cultivators. First seen in chapter 746, he is capable of creating clones of himself. A caravan of about 30 men were traveling down wilderness with grassland as far as the eye could see. There were 8 carriages among them, accompanied by young leather-clothed horsemen, with a few of them only reaching the ages of 12, but they all were in high spirits regardless. At the very front of the caravan was an old man riding a fine yellow horse. He had sharp creases in his brow and dark red skin. He also wore a fire-red fox hide cap, gorgeous robes, and a tricolored embroidered belt that symbolized his position as the master of the group. They were traveling through the north of the endless sky plains, on their way to pay tribute to a temple belonging to the Soaring Tribes. The endless sky plains were what the Soaring Tribes called the Mulan Plains. This was due to Soaring Tribes' belief that their patron god, the endless sky beast, had protected them for generations. Originally, the Soaring Tribes occupied the southern portion of the endless sky plains, but ever since their victory in the war against the Mulan 30 years ago, they occupied the entirety of the plains, and their strength massively surged, leaving them without match in the area. Of course, given the huge size of the Soaring Tribes, they consisted of countless smaller tribe divisions. Smaller tribes consisted of 100,000 men, with the largest tribes reaching around 100 million men. Because there were many men who won merits in the last war, many new tribes had emerged with a majority of them being quite insignificant, only numbering tens of thousands of men. The master of the escort was named Yinglu. He was the leader of a small tribe that had split off from a larger one. Although they were considered a tribe, they only consisted of about 80,000 men. When he was young, he was a formidable warrior and struck down several small Mulan tribes in the war, capturing many of their nobles in the process and earning his current rank. However, he was unable to withstand the ravages of time. With the addition of the toil he put his body through over the years, he now appeared elderly despite only being 50 years old. Yinglu looked to the blazing sun in the sky, noticing that it was noon before turning to look at the young man behind him. He sighed. Regardless of how small a tribe was, they had to regularly present tribute to the immortals in case they came across calamities or demon beasts. However, newly formed small tribes like their own were unable to call upon immortals. Even the lowest grade immortals were unwilling to watch over tribes as small as theirs. After all, it was better for an immortal to join more prosperous tribes, granting them more resources to further their cultivation. However, there are a few small tribes that had low-grade immortals, but these immortals had originated from these tribes or their aptitude was too poor to join larger tribes. As for Yinglu's Gray Heron tribe, they didn't have the opportunity to nurture an immortal for themselves. Whenever something happened over the years, they could only hire the immortals of neighboring tribes at great cost to assist them. Their price was extremely high and would only assist them a few times at the cost of the tribe's revenue for half the year. As the tribe wasn't wealthy to begin with, this cost had put them in a hard situation. Fortunately, 20 years had passed, and the day of spirit release has finally come for their tribe once more. Yinglu handled this with care and didn't allow this opportunity to pass him. He promptly led several of the tribe disciples to the nearest soaring tribe's temple. The endless sky temples were originally established to honor their patron god, but after many years of development, they have become holy lands to the people of the soaring tribes, where low-grade immortals were fostered by the soaring tribes. Every temple was managed by several high-grade immortals, responsible for imparting basic methods of cultivation. Once that was done, the lower aptitude cultivators were sent back to their tribes to receive their support there. As for the high aptitude cultivators, they were accepted as disciples by the high-grade immortals and were personally nurtured. But before one could receive personal instruction from high-grade immortals, they must go through the spirit release rites. There were only about 70 endless sky temples spread throughout the plains, but each of them were the heart of the regions they were located and had thousands of variously sized tribes surrounding them. Since there was only one temple in the region, the largest sects resided closest to it, and as a small sect, the Gray Heron tribe resided in an area farther away. Their journey to the temple would take 3 months at the very least. Helpless, they could only depart 4 months ahead of time. On the previous day of spirit release, he had already established his tribe, but he wasn't able to gather enough tribute for the temple, so he could only watch the opportunity pass him by. As a result, Yinglu was unwilling to allow this chance to miss his tribe again. He even reduced the rations of the tribe and cut on other costs for the sake of this day so they could acquire an immortal for their tribe. However, they had to bring the tribute through wide expanses of grassland, an extremely dangerous task for mortals like them. After all, the tribute consisted of materials useful towards immortals and even more precious towards mortals. If they weren't careful, they could be robbed, even by an immortal. This was a common occurrence whenever a day of spirit release approached. It was better for the tribes closer to the temple, as none dared to be too imprudent in its proximity, but it proved extremely dangerous for tribes farther away. It was once said that the tribute from a mid-grade tribe, a 1,000-year medicine herb, was leaked and made known to many. As a result, a high-grade immortal from a larger sect plundered it. Of course, the immortals of the temple were angered by this and dispatched an immortal to investigate this matter, but it was unknown if anything came of it. With such events having happened, Yinglu been extremely worried ever since he left his tribe. Although he was carrying the tribute, he didn't have the protection of an immortal. As the day of spirit release approached, immortals from many tribes were occupied with matters from the temple. Even if one had spirit stones, the immortals were too busy to accept. Occasionally, there would be wandering immortals, and the larger tribes nearby would rush to hire them at great cost. Weaker tribes couldn't hope to compete. With that thought, Yinglu sighed and glanced behind him again. 4 of the 8 carriages carried tribute, all of them pulled by the most meticulously chosen steeds in the tribe. These carriages were also crafted from the hardy red birch wood. Of course, To make sure that they wouldn't catch any attention, the carriages' exteriors were ragged and worn. Even with these measures, they had encountered a small pack of feral wolves and nearly lost one of their members. In order to escape the wolves, they had to abandon the two slowest carriages. Although the two carriages didn't carry anything particularly costly, they did hold enough food for 2 months. It seemed that they would have no choice but to make a temporary stop in 2 days. There should be a nearby valley where men rarely tread, but there may be some wild bison or other game to hunt. With that thought, Yinglu stroked the hardwood bow that hung from his saddle. What happened? A young woman at Yinglu's side yelped in alarm. The woman was 15 years old and was named Yingshan. She was a relative of Yinglu and was one of the few people in the tribe who possessed spirit roots. It was only natural for him to dote on her. Yinglu hastily raised his head in alarm and saw waves of azure light in some dense shrubbery ahead of him. Yinglu's heart trembled. As the leader of his tribe, he was naturally familiar with the light released from immortal techniques. Could it be they wished to act against a group as destitute as his? Yinglu's heart sank and he raised his hand, ordering the group behind him to stop. When the others saw the azure light ahead of them, they instantly grew cautious from alarm. Yinglu firmly grasped onto his horse's reins and had it come to a stop. He then began to think of a plan to defend themselves. But after a short moment, Yinglu felt that there was something amiss. The azure light in the shrubbery continuously flickered, but there were no immortals or any techniques that emerged from it. Yinglu's eyes brightened, and he hastily examined the shrubbery. The dense shrubbery were about as tall as a person and couldn't be clearly seen through. Yinglu's gaze wavered, and he suddenly shouted, "Tu Meng, go over there and take a look to see whether or not there is an immortal there." "Yes, tribe elder." A young man with a sturdy and formidable appearance descended from his horse and carefully approached the shrubbery that was 60 meters away from him. When the azure light was only 20 meters away, he hesitated and his feet came to a stop. "May I ask for the name of the immortal here? We are the Gray Heron tribe, and we wish to pay our respects in front of your true appearance." The youth spoke with a clear tone of respect. However, the light in the shrubbery continued to flicker, and no response was given. Tu Meng couldn't help but to look at Yinglu. Yinglu lowered his head in thought for a moment before silently nodding. The youth then gathered a bit of courage and walked forward with silent steps. When he arrived in front of the shrubbery, he gritted his teeth and parted the wild grass in front of him. In that instant, the youth Tu Meng parted away the grass and shouted in alarm before he quickly recoiled several steps back, falling on his back. He appeared thoroughly shocked. What's going on? The Gray Heron tribe members were shocked by this sudden turn of events. There were even a few members that drew their blades in case. Don't blindly take action. Tu Meng, what happened? Yinglu still retained his calm. He saw that the youth was still uninjured and was only frightened. "Tribe head, there is an immortal there, he looks." Before the youth could finish, the azure light suddenly disappeared from the shrubbery and he was interrupted by a cold snort. Then a silhouette walked out in strides and asked, "Looks like what?" Yinglu and the others hastily looked over in shock. The man who appeared from the shrubbery was wearing white robes and had an ordinary stature. However, he was covering his head with a peculiar blue cloak that concealed his face. There were bulging pouches at his waist, and he carried a foot-long wooden box on his back. "I pay my respects, immortal. I am the leader of the Gray Heron tribe, Yinglu. May I know your esteemed name?" When Yinglu saw him appear, he immediately dismounted from his horse and deeply bowed towards the white-robed man, not daring to offend him. His tribe members followed suit as well. The white-robed man examined Yinglu's party before coldly replying, "My surname is Han, the Gray Heron tribe. I've never heard of it before. I was cultivating inside the thicket. What have you come here for?" "So it is immortal Han. We truly had no idea you were cultivating here. We hope you will forgive us for any offense we may have caused. May we ask which tribe worships you, sir? Perhaps I may be acquainted with that tribe." Yinglu felt relieved when he heard that the immortal didn't have the mind to attack them. The white-robed man's eyes flickered, and he indifferently said, "I've only recently finished my apprenticeship, and I haven't attached myself to a tribe." So Sir Immortal is unattached. Since you are here alone, you must be going to the temple. It is the day of spirit release, something that only happens once every 20 years. Surely Immortal Han won't be missing it." When Yinglu heard that the immortal was still unaffiliated, his tone became even more respectful. "That's right," the white-robed man answered. He then looked at the carriages behind him and curiously asked, "Are you heading to the temple to present tribute? I don't see any immortals following you. Our Grey Heron tribe is small in size. We've yet to hold an immortal in our ranks. As such, Yinglu respectfully explained his situation. He immediately determined that the immortal's words were true. Why else would he act so curiously? With that in his mind, Yinglu suddenly felt a few lingering thoughts brought to the forefront of his mind. Since you came across me unintentionally, I will forget this matter. Leave. After a moment of hesitation, the white-robed man waved his hand at them, indicating them to depart. Yinglu had originally feared this white-robed man, but now he resolved himself to have him stay. After taking a deep breath, he suddenly smiled and said, "Sir Immortal, since you also wish to visit the temple, would you be interested in entering the hire of the Grey Heron tribe? If you accompany us to the temple, we are willing to give 20 spirit stones to you." "Hire me?" The white-robed man appeared surprised. "That's right," Yinglu replied with an honest expression. "Since Sir Immortal is going to the temple regardless, he may as well come with us. With no immortal guarding us, I fear that we won't be able to safely reach the temple. After all, there are far too many dangers on the road. It would be too slow to travel with you mortals, and 20 spirit stones is—" The white-robed man appeared hesitant. Yinglu bitterly smiled and said, "So long as Sir Immortal agrees, I am willing to give 25 spirit stones. I'll be honest, our Grey Heron tribe isn't large. This is the limit that we can offer you." The white-robed man smiled in response. 25 spirit stones is a good amount, but don't you want to ask me of my rank before naming your price? Perhaps I am only at the third or second layer of chi condensation without the ability to protect you." Yinglu forced a chuckle and said, "Sir Immortal is joking. Although I don't have any spirit roots, I've gained much experience in my time in the Holy War. The light you released isn't something that a third-grade chi condensation immortal could produce." Without further consideration, the white-robed man said, "Good. Since you are so sincere, I will journey with you. However, I will be taking half of the spirit stones first. Once we arrive, you can pay me the other half." "Of course, here are the spirit stones, Sir Immortal." Yinglu was happy with his reply and patted his robes before taking out a small pouch. He then picked out a number of spirit stones and promptly handed them over to the white-robed man. After the white-robed man took the spirit stones, they disappeared in a flash of light. This caused some of the youths to yelp in surprise. "What, you've never seen a storage pouch before?" the white-robed man asked in surprise. "Sir Immortal, these youths haven't had much experience with immortals," Yinglu said with slight embarrassment. So it was like that. The white-robed man nodded in understanding and then glanced at the carriages with some hesitation. As Yinglu had many dealings with immortals in the past, he immediately shouted, "Quickly prepare the best carriage for Immortal Han and allow him to meditate. Hurry." When the youths heard their leader, they awoke from their daze and completely unloaded one of the carriages and put the cargo onto the other carriages. Once the carriage was completely unloaded, the white-robed man faced Yinglu and said, "Thank you for your consideration. I will be resting on the carriage. Just call out to me if anything happens. And since I'm already fasting, there is no need to disturb me during peacetime." "Of course I will keep it in mind." Yinglu bowed and widely smiled. The white-robed man nodded and promptly approached the carriage in strides, but after taking several steps, he suddenly turned to the youth Tu Meng and coldly said, "Did you see my face? I don't want rumors to spread, so you had best keep it to yourself." The white-robed man didn't say another word and then climbed on the carriage, closing the curtains and blocking everything from view. Tu Meng's face turned deathly pale. Although the white-clothed man had already entered the carriage, the youth was still repeatedly shaking his head. Yinglu loudly shouted, "Since we've acquired an immortal, we may journey with ease." Everyone set off. He then turned to the young woman at his side and said, "Ying Shan, follow the immortal's carriage. If he has any commands for you, follow them. Serve him well." When the young woman heard this, she happily agreed, knowing what he meant. As the other youths drove the carriages forward, they whispered to each other spiritedly. Although there had been immortals that handled affairs on the tribe's behalf, they immediately departed once they were finished. They didn't have the opportunity to see or speak with an immortal. They were naturally curious. Hidden inside the covered carriage, the white-robed man was sitting cross-legged without motion. "Youngster Han, it seems the technique you used on that soaring tribe's member had scared him quite a bit. Perhaps he might have nightmares on this in the future, he." An aged voice filled with schadenfreude spoke from the back of the white-robed man's mind. The white-robed man ignored his statement and asked, "Is the pestilence demon soulic technique truly effective, Senior? I don't wish to become a monster that only knows slaughter before I find a method to dispel this baleful chi. Be at ease, the old voice lazily said. Although this secret technique was something I founded to dispel the backlash from the Great Development Technique, it is equally useful towards restraining baleful chi. However, I must warn you that the pestilence demons possessing your body aren't only restricting your baleful chi, but they are restricting your cultivation as well. Your current cultivation is at most at the level of mid-foundation establishment stage, but you must remember not to rashly use your magic power by any means. The white-robed man sullenly said, "That goes without saying, of course, but I didn't think the baleful chi backlash would occur far quicker than you had anticipated, and its violent nature was far worse than I've heard." The aged voice snorted and said, "It wasn't that I guessed incorrectly, but that you had to fight with other cultivators before you managed to dispel your baleful chi. You even heavily damaged your vitality to the point of near death. It is only natural for the baleful chi to backlash. As for its violent nature, it is only to be expected from how deeply it has accumulated on your body. Were it not for the fact you are helping me refine my puppet body, I would be disinterested to help you." Needless to say, these two were Han Li and Monarch's soul divergence. It had now been half a year since Han Li left the Drifting Cloud sect. After he left the Heavenly South, he directly entered the Mulan Plains and carefully concealed his cultivation and identity. At the start, it went smoothly, and he assumed the identity as an unaffiliated cultivator, safely entering many Mulan tribes and even exchanging cultivation experiences with a soaring tribe's cultivator. But after he crossed most of the plains and arrived in the south, wanton calamity struck down upon him. In a wasteland far from the soaring tribes, he had routinely released his gold-devouring beetles and was about to prepare his strongest batch of beetles for reproduction when a mid-nascent soul-stage soaring tribe's elder came across Han Li while he was chasing down a demon bird. The soaring tribe's elder was also controlling a single fully mature gold-devouring beetle at the time. Because the rainbow skirt grass was so convenient to use and mature, Han Li had grown careless, as nothing happened to him in the past when he used it. Without any high-grade concealment spell formations placed down, the soaring tribe's elder saw Han Li's beetles swarm in plain sight. When the soaring tribe's elder saw the 10,000 gold-devouring beetles floating above Han Li, he nearly passed Han Li by in shock. He promptly ignored the demon bird and immediately demanded Han Li to follow him to see some kind of holy woman of theirs. Han Li couldn't agree to such conditions and immediately set out to kill him. He promptly used several grand abilities along with his second nascent soul, resulting in the destruction of the cultivator's physical body. But Han Li then gloomily discovered that the soaring tribe's elder cultivated a very strange technique. He was able to split his nascent soul into 7 divisions, each of them skilled in evasion techniques. During a moment of carelessness, Han Li allowed one of them to escape. It was then that Han Li realized that he stirred up the hornet's nest. Not daring to linger for even a moment, he flew south throughout the night. But by using some unknown method, Han Li suddenly found many soaring tribes' nascent soul cultivators pursuing him several days later. Even one of the soaring tribes, 4 late nascent soul cultivators were present. Han Li repeatedly fought several battles and slew several high-grade cultivators, but the late nascent soul cultivator amongst them struck a heavy blow against Han Li while he was distracted. Were it not for the myriad-year spirit milk and the bloodshadow evasion, he feared his life would have been forfeit. Although he managed to temporarily evade pursuit through these measures, Han Li suddenly discovered something immensely troubling affecting his body. Perhaps as a result from the loss of strength and injuries from the constant battles, the baleful chi on his body broke out and began to undergo backlash. Fortunately, he was able to see this ahead of time with his immense spiritual sense and used secret techniques to forcefully suppress it. This made his bad situation even worse. Helpless, he could only ask Monarch's soul divergence for guidance out of this perilous situation. As an old eccentric that had lived over 10,000 years, Monarch's soul divergence immediately gave Han Li the pestilence demon's soulic seal to temporarily seal the baleful chi. However, the consequences were immense. Before he could find a method to dissolve the baleful chi, he would need to seal the demons of pestilence along with his baleful inside of his body. This would contain a majority of his baleful chi at the cost of most of his cultivation. If he rashly made use of his magic power during this time, the baleful chi and pestilence demons would backlash. Han Li was fully aware of the consequences of this technique and hesitated in using it. But as he evaded pursuit, the baleful chi in his body underwent backlash with far greater intensity than before. In a moment of desperation, he hastily landed in the shrubbery and without the time to even place down a protective spell formation, he employed the pestilence demon's soulic seal with frantic need. When Ying Lu had arrived, Han Li was in the final stages of employing the technique. The youth Mu Teng parted the shrubbery just as Han Li's face wore the appearance of one of the 5 pestilence demons sealed inside of him. It was incredibly gruesome, giving the youth much cause for fright. The youth currently believed the ghost face to be Han Li's true appearance. With that thought, Han Li couldn't help but wryly smile. Although I am temporarily able to restrain the baleful qi, a vast majority of my cultivation was sealed. It is fortunate that I am escorting these mortals to an endless sky temple. Nothing should happen along the way, Han Li muttered. Monarch Soul Divergence coldly chuckled and said, although your cultivation is sealed and you aren't able to use your ancient treasures and flying swords, you can still use your gold-devouring beetle and second nascent soul. However, you did give the nascent soul-grade puppet you refined to your senior martial brother Lu before you left, and you also gave a majority of your core formation stage puppets to that concubine of yours. Those puppets would be rather useful right now. And Li indifferently said, I didn't know when I'd be able to return to the heavenly south, so I had left the puppets behind in case of contingencies. Even if senior martial brother Cheng will soon perish, Lu Luo will have the nascent soul stage puppet to assist him, and Mu Paling will be safe with the tortoise puppets I've given her. Otherwise, I would have felt ill at ease heading towards the Great Jin. In that case, don't complain about any dangers you encounter, Monarch Soul Divergence said with disapproval. After a moment of silence, Han Li's expression stirred and he asked, is there any way to temporarily dissolve the pestilence demon soulic after it is placed? My gold-devouring beetles and second nascent soul shouldn't have any problem dealing with core formation opponents, of course, but it will be dangerous if I run into an enemy at nascent soul stage. I don't know how long it will take before I can find a method to dissolve my baleful qi. Temporarily dissolve the seal. Monarch Soul Divergence paused for a moment before slowly replying. It might not be possible for others, but it could be possible with the many treasures in your possession. However, the cost will be steep. What cost? So long as it doesn't affect my future cultivation, I will accept the cost. It will be better than losing my life at a desperate moment. In that case, it will be quite simple. Each time you wish to dispel the seal, it will require 2 drops of the myriad-year spirit milk. I'll give you another set of secret techniques to release the pestilence demons and temporarily allow the baleful qi. According to present circumstances, your magic power will be restored for about 2 hours. After that time passes, the spirit milk will be completely devoured by the pestilence demons, and your magic power will be sealed once more. And each time the seal is released, the baleful qi will take over a portion of your soul. After a certain number of times, even the pestilence demons will not be able to restrain the baleful qi backlash. Although myriad-year spirit milk is precious, it isn't as precious as my own life, but aggravating the baleful qi backlash won't be good by any means. Will this cause any future problems after I dispel the baleful qi? There will certainly be problems after releasing the baleful qi. Under your current circumstances, I reckon that you will only be able to lift the seal 5 of 6 times before the pestilence demons lose control. It is up to you to weigh what there is to gain and lose. There isn't much to think about, Han Li said with decisiveness. I will only use it during matters of life and death. How about Senior pass the technique on to me? I will only say the incantation once, so remember it properly. Monarch Soul Divergence then uttered the incantation for the technique. Han Li closed his eyes and committed the incantation to memory. Han Li opened his eyes and calmly said, all right, it appears this technique isn't very difficult. I should be able to use it after a few days of comprehension. Of course, it is but a common method of removing seals, but youngster Han, do you truly plan on following these mortals to the endless sky temple? Monarch Soul Divergence curiously asked. Surely you would know that this event of theirs will attract many soaring tribes cultivators. Has Senior heard of the proverb that the most dangerous areas are actually safest? If I wholeheartedly wish to conceal myself, I am confident that I would be able to stay hidden for some time, but with the baleful qi winding around my body, I would need to urgently hurry to the great Jin Empire. As for my pursuers, they would be looking everywhere for lone travelers such as myself. In that case, it'd be better for me to mingle among the cultivators near the temple. Since there are many cultivators there, it would be impossible for my pursuers to look at them all. And given that I've already lived several months in the Mulan Plains, I am confident I'll be able to disguise myself as a low-grade cultivator. In any case, the temple just happens to be in the direction of the Great Jin. It seems I was just being meddlesome as you already have a plan. Monarch's Soul Divergence chuckled and then said nothing else. When Han Li heard this, he sighed and immediately asked, Silvermoon, how are you faring? In that last battle, you also sustained heavy injuries. Many thanks for your concern, Silvermoon replied with a faint voice. Since I am an artifact spirit, wounds don't affect me much, but my fox suffered significant damage and can't be used to assist Master for a time. Feeling relieved, Han Li gently replied, It will be no matter. In the future I will act carefully, so there should be no need for you to take action. Take your time to recover. Yes, Master. After strenuously forcing out an answer, Silvermoon spoke no more. With a grimace, Han Li wryly chuckled in his mind. Han Li quietly meditated for a moment more in the carriage before brushing his hand past the storage pouch, producing a foot-long jade box in his hand. Several white sparkling talismans were stuck onto the box as if sealing it. Han Li then stroked the talismans on the jade box with his finger with a wavering expression. As previously stated in Chapter 742, gold-devouring beetles were also nurtured and used by the soaring tribes. Chapter 883. Another perspective on the day Han Li struck down the flesh body of the soaring tribe's mid-nascent soul cultivator. A portion of cultivator's nascent soul managed to escape, but the fully matured gold-devouring beetle that was under his control were left behind. Familiar with the characteristics of the beetle, Han Li easily captured it alive with his second nascent soul and restrained them in a jade box. He originally planned on waiting for a safe time before examining the differences between the mature gold-devouring beetles and his own, but given his current drop in cultivation, he needed to deal with the insect as soon as possible. If the abilities of the mature gold-devouring beetle was far greater than what he originally anticipated, and it broke out of its restrictions, it would be hugely troublesome with his current cultivation, as he wouldn't be able to restrain it. With that in mind, Han Li took a deep breath and suddenly flipped his hand, producing several variously colored formation flags in his palm. With a flick of his fingers, the formation flags scattered and formed a restriction barrier enveloping the carriage. Han Li placed the jade box on his knee and slowly closed his eyes. Black light flashed and a black-green nascent soul appeared from the top of his head. The nascent soul rubbed its hands together and summoned the jet-black yin-sifting banner into its grasp. Because he handed over the flag for his second nascent soul to refine, it was the soul magic treasure that was able to escape the restraints of the pestilence demon's soulic seal. Gold-devouring beetles couldn't be harmed with heat or cold and were impervious to blades. The only method he had currently that could kill them were the yin essence devil heads formed from the banner. Their refinement method was something he had acquired from the soul of the yin-sifting sect elder. Of course, wiping away the soul imprints on the fully matured gold-devouring beetle wasn't something that could be done in a short amount of time. In truth, if the gold-devouring beetle's master had perished instead of being severely weakened, he wouldn't have dared to make an attempt. He was incredibly cautious of the mature gold-devouring beetle and placed down several restrictions as a result, fearing that they run rampant. Then the black-green nascent soul waved its small flag above its head, and a foot-long cloud of devilish chi appeared above it. The nascent soul leapt forward and disappeared into the cloud before the cloud sank downward and wrapped around the jade box. The sound of the soft buzzing within the box suddenly grew louder and fervent. The devilish cloud wrapped around the jade box began to roil and the buzzing became sharp and deafening, but Han Li was indifferent. With his hands grasped in an incantation gesture, his body remained still. Under these restrictions, he had no fear of the buzzing alerting the gray heron tribe outside. He simply drew out the beetle's primal soul. The difficult refinement process had started. The gray heron tribe members were greatly interested in immortal Han, but ever since he entered the carriage, he hadn't emerged. Clan leader Ying Lu had particularly forbidden anyone from disturbing the immortals' cultivation, much to the disappointment of many of the youths. 10 days later, they found a pack of wild goats across the canyon and hunted quite a bit of them. And after half a month, nothing out of the ordinary had happened, much to the relief of Ying Lu. After another few days, they arrived at a very safe place for rest. The endless sky temples would use magic power to quickly set up temporary encampment nearby, specifically as rest stops for any tribes passing through. Once the day of spirit release passed, these rest stops would be immediately dissolved. As Ying Lu thought this, a sound suddenly appeared from above, and he unconsciously raised his head to take a look. It was a streak of blinding white light streaking past them. A faint silhouette could be seen within the light, and it disappeared an instant later. When Ying Lu and the youth saw this, an uproar broke out. Ying Lu frowned and felt somewhat apprehensive. From his experience in the past sacred war, those streaking lights were produced by high-grade immortals. This strange scene was rarely seen. High-grade immortals only flew across the highest of places where mortals could rarely see them. If he remembered correctly, in the past few days, he saw 4 streaks of light flying at a low altitude. Could it be that something important happened in the past few days? Was a tribe robbed of their tribute? Despite the puzzlement he felt, the old man felt relief. With high-grade immortals patrolling the skies, they should be safe for the time being. After some further consideration, Ying Lu loudly called out the escort behind him and urged them to gain more speed. Unbeknownst to Ying Lu, the white light had actually scoured a perimeter of 50 kilometers at a low altitude before heading off south, and a streak of red light not far away flew in its direction. When the 2 streaks of light encountered one another, their light disappeared to reveal a middle-aged man wearing faint yellow fur clothes and a beautiful woman in her late 20s wearing palace robes. The middle-aged man took the initiative to salute the woman and said, "So it was Immortal Ziu. I didn't discover anything on my side. How about you?" "Brother Li, does it look like I found anything?" The woman spoke coldly with a grimace. The middle-aged man sighed with an anxious expression and said, "In the last few days, we already searched an area of 1,000 kilometers only to find no trace of him. Even if his concealment techniques were brilliant, we should definitely be able to find traces of him with our cultivation. How about we interrogate the tribute carriages traveling down below? It seems Immortal Li is truly tempted by the reward, but is the venomous dragon pill worth your life?" the woman said with a cold laugh. The middle-aged man paused for a moment before asking with bewilderment, "What is that supposed to mean? Could it be that Immortal Ziu isn't tempted by the reward?" The woman didn't directly respond and indifferently asked, "When Brother Li received the mission, what did those nascent soul-grade elders tell you?" After some hesitation, the middle-aged man honestly replied, "My superior told me that there was a foreign nascent soul cultivator that is trespassing in our endless sky plains. He also grievously injured one of our elders. As such, he must be captured alive. Given that he is injured, it should be possible for core formation cultivators like us to capture him." The woman snorted and a mocking smile appeared on her face. "Brother Li, because you've come late, you don't know much of the situation. If it were me, I absolutely wouldn't want to find this foreign cultivator. Since Cultivator Ziu has spoken as such, there must be a reason. Could you tell me why?" the middle-aged man asked with a solemn expression. After a moment of silence, the woman sighed and said, "We've known each other for many years. I will tell you the truth and prevent you from foolishly throwing away your life. I arrived earlier and heard some information about this foreign cultivator from one of the elders. It is true that this foreign cultivator is at nascent soul stage and is grievously wounded, but the one who personally dealt the blow wasn't any nascent soul cultivator, but the one of the grand immortals." "What, a grand immortal was the one to injure him?" the man asked in shock. "That's right. I also heard the grand immortal was only able to launch a successful sneak attack on the foreign cultivator when he was surrounded by many other elders. Before this, he had already killed 3 nascent soul-grade immortals. It was said this person possessed extremely vicious abilities and that he was unfazed by the attacks. Even under heavy injury, he was able to escape the grand immortal through the use of a secret technique. From the way I see it, this foreign cultivator is likely on par with our grand immortal. In that case, he will be able to easily slay 2 measly core formation cultivators like us, no matter how injured he may be. I don't wish to forfeit my life over a venomous dragon pill." The woman's face turned sullen as she continued, "And from the way I see it, the nascent soul immortals that dispatched us are most likely leaving us to die. Didn't they employ a soul-guiding technique on each of us before they sent us out? They said it was so that they can find us when we're in danger, but they're most likely just using us to scare him out of hiding. Then when we fall, they will use the soul-guiding technique to track him down." The middle-aged man felt his breath run cold and he spoke out in furious alarm. "They would actually treat us like cannon fodder. How will we handle this?" "It is quite simple," the woman said. "Didn't we already look through the area? There is no need to go any further. Since we can report back to our superiors, there will be no further exposure to danger. If someone else has found the foreign cultivator, that will be fine. And it won't matter if no sighting of him was found either. Then when the day of spirit release arrives, all immortals will be heading to the temples to pay their respects. We will be summoned there as well." After a moment of hesitation, he decisively said, From your words, you mean to say that while the venomous dragon pill is valuable, I am more likely to lose my life in the process. Many thanks for the explanation, Immortal Zeus. The woman smiled and said, "Good. Since that has been resolved, let's go rest at the temple encampment for a bit. In the past few days, many tribes had brought forth their tributes. Perhaps we'll be able to find something we need ahead of time. Then we can conduct another search periodically every few days as we look through the tributes." Of course, the middle-aged man raised no objections. Soon after, the red and white streaks of light flew directly south. In a completely sealed room, there was a 3-meter-tall offering table surrounded by a dozen of various colored formation flags. The flags glowed with light and formed a temporary spell formation. On the table, there was a dark green formation plate surrounded with waves of green chi. The figure of a nascent soul could be faintly seen sitting cross-legged within the smoke and appeared to be breathing the smoke in and out as if it were cultivating something. At the corners of the sealed room, there were 4 old men sitting cross-legged, who each held a dark green spell flag in their hands. The flags were all pointed at the circular plate at the center of the room, and they released faint threads of green smoke that slowly spread towards the plate. This strange scene almost appeared as if painted. The room was completely silent. After an unknown amount of time, the 4 old men appeared to have grown tired, and the nascent soul within the green mist became more stable and clearer to see. The red-haired old man sitting in one of the corners put away the flag and stood up, cupping his fist to the other 3 in the room. "I can't thank you fellow Taoists enough for your hard work. After a few more days, Junior Martial Brother Gui will be able to recover." Once this was said, the other 3 also put away their spell flags. The pale, beardless old man among them hastily returned the salute and chuckled, saying, "There is no need for Brother Hun to appear overly courteous. I've known Brother Gui for many years. Using a bit of my strength for him is only natural." The red-haired old man then took a brief glance at the nascent soul sitting cross-legged and sincerely said, "Regardless of how it is said, my junior martial brother and I will always remember this kindness." The pale old man chuckled and said, "Don't be so formal, fellow Taoist Hun." The red-haired old man's expression sank and he sullenly said, "That's right. We've been trapped here since the very beginning to assist Immortal Gui over the loss of his nascent soul. We don't yet know if there was more information on the foreign cultivator. We all know how incredibly rare it is for gold-devouring beetles to lay eggs. It is truly hard to believe there are others in this world capable of controlling over 10,000 of them. Since I was late to arrive, I didn't join the battle to trap the foreign cultivator. He must have been fearsome since he took down 3 nascent soul stage immortals." When he said this, the other 3 exchanged a glance and revealed faint dread on their faces. The pale old man sighed and said, "How could there be such a fearsome person? In addition to his gold-devouring beetles, he can also release purple flames and golden lightning. Of the first group of nascent soul immortals to block his path, there were 2 who perished as a result of these 2 techniques. The golden lightning trapped one of the immortal's nascent soul, and the purple flame easily destroyed it. As for the second immortal, he would have died no matter how careful he would have been. Not only that, but he also controls fearsome magic treasures," the plump old man added on with a fearful expression. "He has a strange set of gold azure flying swords that number around 60 or 70, all of them incredibly sharp. There were many treasures destroyed by those swords, not to mention that wicked pair of wings on his back that are capable of lightning movement without an incantation, making him nearly impossible to catch." Brother Hun may jest over the matter, but when the 7 of us surrounded him at the time, we felt our backs drenched in sweat from an immense fear of death. Just as we were on the verge of retreating for the time being, one of the Grand Elders fortunately responded to our summons on time, and he launched a sneak attack on the foreign cultivator and heavily injured him with the elemental immortal rest palm. After the foreign cultivator was injured, he instantly transformed into a crimson blur and broke through the encirclement. We attempted to use our spiritual sense to find him, but we couldn't find a single trace of him. The Grand Elder explained that this person has already fled hundreds of kilometers away, and we were unable to pursue him as a result. The red-haired old man wore an unsightly expression and asked, "Could it be this person is actually a famous top-grade cultivator from one of the grand sects of the great Jin Empire? It is no wonder that only one of Junior Martial Brother Gui's 6 Essence Soul divisions was barely able to escape him." "There is no need for Brother Hun to worry. You should know the might of the elemental immortal rest palm. Even if that person escaped from this land, the strike should have greatly damaged his cultivation. There is no need to fear him. Furthermore, The guest that accompanied the saintess from the Great Jinn is residing in a nearby endless sky temple. If that person is a cultivator from the Great Jinn, the guest should know of his strange abilities. You'll be able to better deal with this cultivator after we figure out how to deal with him. Even if this person is truly a cultivator from a powerful sect from the Great Jinn, the Grand Elders won't let him go after killing so many of our nascent soul immortals. Besides, his methods of breeding such a vast number of gold-devouring beetles must also be investigated. The pale-faced old man spoke with a tone of resentment. It appeared he had suffered quite a bit in his battle with Han Li. "I hope that is the case," the red-haired old man muttered. "But fortunately, the cultivator's gold-devouring beetles haven't yet fully matured. Otherwise, he would have forced even the 4 great elders to retreat if he would have released 10,000 of them." When the other old men heard this, they exchanged a glance and could only bitterly smile. As soaring tribes immortals, they naturally knew the might of fully mature gold-devouring beetles. Just as the old men in the room felt at ease, the nascent soul sitting cross-legged in the green mist suddenly let out a piercing shriek, and its hands held its head as it rolled around in great anguish. Its body appeared as if on the verge of dissipating. "Not good, everyone quickly take action," the red-haired old man immediately shouted in alarm. When the other old men saw what was happening, they knew matters had turned for the worse, and they quickly summoned the spell flags once more. Under the control of their spell seals, 4 clouds of green mist shot towards the center of the room and enveloped the nascent soul in an attempt to restore it. Time slowly passed by as the 4 old men mustered their might, and the screaming from within the green mist lessened. After a moment more, the nascent soul was calmly sitting cross-legged once more as it attempted to absorb the green mist with all of its strength. After an unknown amount of time, the nascent soul softly spoke as if attempting to catch its breath. Many thanks for your great assistance. I am fine. Now, you may stop." When the 4 old men heard this, they felt a wave of relief and ceased their casting. To tell the truth, they had been straining themselves after doing this for so long. Although they were still able to push themselves to continue, their vitality and strength would suffer as a result. The pale old man couldn't help but ask, "Brother Gui, what caused your nascent soul to disperse once more? This is extremely dangerous." The nascent soul gritted its teeth and said, Fellow Taoists, please don't worry. Nothing else will happen, it's just that. My link with my gold-devouring beetle was severed. My spiritual sense was affected." The red-haired old man felt his heart drop and he asked in alarm, "What?" The gold-devouring beetle had perished. How had he done this? Mature gold-devouring beetles are nearly invulnerable. How could they be easily destroyed? After a moment of thought, the pale old man said, "This isn't anything odd. Without Brother Gui to personally command them, their destruction was inevitable. After all, there are a few top-grade Devil Dao techniques able to directly strike at their souls without striking at their body." "Oh, in that case, this person must be a Devil Dao cultivator," the 4th shriveled old man hesitantly said. "But when we first fought against him, a majority of his techniques didn't appear to come from the Devil Dao." When that was said, the many cultivators looked at each other in dismay as silence filled the room. Meanwhile, in a faraway place, Han Li was taking a deep breath inside the carriage. He felt quite a bit of relief in his heart. After half a month of continuous effort, he eventually managed to wipe away the soul in the mature gold-devouring beetle and absorbed it into the yin-sifting banner. During this time, the Gray Heron tribe didn't disturb him even once, much to Han Li's unexpected delight. Of course, he was completely ignorant that he had nearly exterminated the owner of the gold-devouring beetle in the instant he destroyed the souls. He waved his hand and grasped at the black devilish chi in front of him. In a gust of wind, a small black flag flew out from the mist and into his hand. The remaining black mist roiled and transformed into a black-green nascent soul. It was holding a huge sparkling golden beetle in its hand. Below the nascent soul was a white jade box with all of its seals removed. Han Li fiddled with the small flag in his hand and swept his gaze past the golden beetle. The beetle was half a foot long and had a pair of vicious inch-long fangs along with a fiendish appearance. It was several times larger than Han Li's own gold-devouring beetles. However, the beetle was completely soulless and lacked any vigor. After some thought, he reached out to the yin-sifting banner, and a fist-sized ball of green light flew out, revolving once in front of him before dropping down. The soft green light appeared exactly the same as the mature gold-devouring beetle, but it was smaller, and its body was tainted black with shining scarlet eyes. "Go," Han Li pointed at it, and the gold-devouring beetle's soul shot into its original body in a streak of black light. Crimson light immediately flashed from the huge golden beetle, and it unfurled its wings before flying around Han Li's second nascent soul. With a happy expression on his face, Han Li muttered, "If I guessed correctly, it should be fine if I treat this insect as a refined demon corpse. Although its power is far less than the original, it should still be exceptionally powerful. If I wish to truly control it, I will have to refine it with devilish qi once through." Under these current circumstances, being able to unleash such a ferocious insect will be very useful in protecting his life. As Han Li's heart stirred, the small flag in his hand grew several times in size, and the matured gold-devouring beetle revolved once around him before landing on the banner. Black qi surged around the banner, and then the beetle disappeared without a trace. Soon after, Han Li unceremoniously tossed the banner towards his black-green nascent soul, and it opened its mouth with a laugh, absorbing the yin-sifting banner into its body. Then, in a flash of light, the nascent soul flew onto the top of Han Li's head and disappeared from sight. Han Li took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He began to comprehend the incantation to dissolve the pestilence demon's soulic seal in case of future mishaps, but then his expression stirred and he turned his head to the sky. Although his cultivation was sealed, this hadn't affected Han Li's powerful spiritual sense. If he were correct, a soaring tribe's cultivator had flown above the Gray Heron tribe's escort once more. He found this quite interesting. This soaring tribe's cultivator was clearly looking for him. Over the last 2 weeks, they would fly above the carriage every 3 days or so, but they would rush away each time. They didn't ask any questions to the mortals in the escort either, saving Han Li the effort of using any of the concealment techniques he prepared. Although he felt puzzled by this, Han Li was happy with their search methods and promptly closed his eyes once more. At that moment, Yinglu loudly shouted to the rest of the escort, "Muster yourselves. In 2 days we'll arrive at the designated temple encampment. When we get there, we can rest safely for a few days." Temple encampment. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred. After muttering to himself for a moment, he paid this no further mind and focused again on comprehending the incantation. Half a day later, Han Li sensed a nearby escort from another tribe. The escort didn't appear very large, but they did have a dozen more members than the Gray Heron tribe's escort. From the direction they were heading in, they should meet with the Gray Heron tribe in about 2 hours, but because they appeared harmless, Han Li hadn't mentioned it to Yinglu. About 2 hours later, the two escorts ran across one another, causing quite the disturbance. Both sides scrambled into formation, but it turned out that Yinglu and the leader of the Red Wolf tribe's escort were old friends. The two were overjoyed by their meeting and decided to travel together. The Red Wolf tribe's leader, a large man with a full beard, glanced at Yinglu's carriages and curiously asked, "Brother Ying, do you have an immortal with your tribe? Is he on a carriage?" Yinglu didn't answer but asked, "Your tribe's immortals aren't on your carriages. Did you bring them on the journey?" "Immortals?" The large man glanced at Yinglu with slanted eyes and muttered, "There was only one, and he was an unaffiliated immortal that I only acquired by abandoning my pride and paying him at great cost. Could it be that you have 2 immortals?" As the two were friends, he spoke without reserve. "2?" Yinglu sighed and said, "I only have one, of course. I've only managed to barely have him agree to protect us on this journey as well." The two then bitterly laughed with a sense of mutual suffering. Yinglu then added on, "All right, we are now only a day away from the encampment and nothing else should happen, but after that, we will pass by the territory of a large tribe along the way. It will be best to be a bit careful. How about we travel together with a few other small tribes along that way? It will be safer, not to mention that we have an immortal in our ranks." The large man hesitated for a moment and asked, "Can I give this some thought? The last time I joined together with many small tribes, I was drawn into trouble because one of the tribes was carrying some incredibly precious goods." Brother Ba's fears are something that rarely ever happens. Yinglu shook his head in disapproval and said, "The odds of small tribes like ours to carry something precious are far lower than our chances getting robbed regardless." "Fine, I'll give the matter some further thought," tribe leader Ba replied. At that moment, the two tribes' escorts were traveling together and were having friendly chats with one another. The particularly beautiful women of the two tribes were being crowded around by the young men, and they would occasionally give off a clear laugh. Since these women were picked to present the tribute, they were naturally among the most beautiful in the tribe. It was no surprise that the men amongst them were filled with excitement. When Yinglu heard the laughter, He couldn't help but shake his head and thought to tell them to quiet down for fear that they would offend the immortal in the carriage. But then, a strange shriek cried out from above and was clearly heard by everyone in the two parties. When Yinglu heard this, his expression vastly changed and he turned to glance at tribe leader Ba at his side. The large man's expression appeared unsightly as well and was filled with terror. "Everyone get down from your horses and hide," Yinglu hurriedly cried out. "They are simian vultures. Quickly call for Immortal Hand to come out." At that moment, tribe leader Ba loudly cried out to his own tribe, "Hide in the carriages. Quickly call out Immortal Feng to deal with these demon birds." At the very name of the simian vultures, the tribes were thrown into a flurry. All of them dismounted from their horses in terror, with some even tumbling down from their horse. Then they lied on their stomachs or hid into the carriages as they looked to the skies with pale complexions. There were 3 black dots in the sky that grew larger to the eye as time passed by. In nearly an instant, they could be made out to be 3 demon birds. They had the head of an ape and the body of a bird. Their wings spanned 6 meters long, and they had a pair of fur-colored ape arms on their body. They loudly bellowed with blood-curdling screams, inciting terror in anyone who heard them. Although simian vultures were only grade 2 demon birds, they were far more cruel and intelligent than other demon beasts of their rank. Not only were they extraordinarily strong and capable of splitting metal with their claws, but their bewitching cries were effective even against early Foundation establishment cultivators, let alone any mortal. Normally, it was rare for one to appear in the plains, but now that 3 have appeared, the mortals in the escort had completely lost themselves to fear. A cold snort sounded out from one of the Red Wolf tribe's carriages, and a blue-clothed silhouette shot out in a flash of red light. As he floated in the air on an embroidered scarf, he disdainfully said, "What is there to panic over? Are they not simply grade 2 demon beasts?" Yinglu couldn't help but look at this person in alarm. This immortal also wore an azure cloak over his head, and his voice sounded young. "Immortal Feng, please be careful. There are 3 simian vultures," tribe leader Ba loudly shouted with a distressed voice. When tribe leader Ba employed Immortal Feng, he knew the cultivator was at the early Foundation establishment stage. According to this, he would have a bit of difficulty dealing with only a single simian vulture, let alone 3 of them. This left tribe leader Ba in much distress. As for Yinglu, he hastily turned his sights on one of his carriages as he laid on his stomach. He saw another man who was also wearing an azure cloak. The man was standing on top of the carriage and was looking at the sky. Yinglu felt somewhat at ease at the sight of Immortal Hand. So long as his cultivation wasn't too low, the 2 immortals may stand a chance of warding off the 3 simian vultures if they joined hands. At that moment, the 3 simian vultures naturally saw the appearance of the blue-robed immortal floating in the air. They hadn't known there was an immortal among the escorts and knew that he would be difficult to deal with, but they were reluctant to abandon their prey. They hesitated for a moment and began to circle in the air about 300 meters away from them. "Looking to die?" the blue-robed man snorted after seeing that the simian vultures wouldn't retreat. Irritated, he raised his hand and simultaneously released several talismans, instantly forming 3 3-meter-long fire serpents that pounced towards the vultures. The fire serpent technique. Hanley couldn't help but to yelp in alarm after seeing this. Although the fire serpent technique was only a low-grade spell technique, the talismans for this technique were quite costly for a Foundation establishment cultivator to casually make use of. This caused Hanley to narrow his eyes, feeling a bit of interest towards this cultivator. However, he soon frowned and inwardly sighed. Although the 3 fire serpents were powerful, the 3 vultures could easily avoid them at such a large distance. It appeared the blue-robed man had a very shallow understanding of the fire serpent technique and didn't know how to command them to pursue an enemy when they evaded, wasting the talismans only to incite the vultures. The biggest of the vultures let out a fierce cry, and the 3 of them simultaneously spread out their wings to dive directly towards the blue-robed cultivator. When the blue-robed man saw that the fire serpents didn't have any effect, he blankly stared for a moment before catching sight of the 3 vultures rushing towards him. Then, in a panic, he rushed to took out a small, shining white sword and began to hastily utter an incantation to have it strike at the vultures. Hanley felt even more disapproval at the sight of this. Given that the vultures were already attacking, it was better to first place a protective barrier on one's body. Wasn't it suicidal to conduct a magic tool to attack instead? It was obvious this cultivator wasn't experienced in battle, but the small sword was a high-grade magic tool. It seemed he had a bit of backing. The blue-robed man uttered the incantation with great practice, and completed activating the magic treasure by the time the vultures had arrived. In a flash of light, the small sword transformed into a meter-long streak of white light and struck at the vulture at the middle with immense speed. The vulture knew that it found itself in a perilous situation and blurred in an attempt to dodge, but it was too late. It could only hold out one of its claws to block the white streak. The white streak was only stalled for a single moment before a blood-curdling scream sounded out. The black claw was easily sliced through by the sword streak, and blood splattered through the air. However, the other two demon birds had already arrived over the blue-robed man's head, their four claws reaching out towards the top of his head. The blue-robed cultivator turned pale with fright and hastily commanded his flying magic tool to shoot back in order to avoid the two simian vultures' attacks. He had clearly underestimated them. As Grade 2 demon beasts, the vultures were bound to possess some ability. Before the two vultures fully descended, they released a piercing shriek. When the blue-robed cultivator heard this, he felt both his body and mind shaking as if he were struck by a hammer and swayed several times. Then, a wind carrying a fishy scent blew down above him, and the blue-robed cultivator yelled in fear, his complexion turning completely pale. At that moment, two muffled booms sounded out. Two fist-sized fireballs had shot out and struck the two incoming vultures. Red light shined from the explosions and raging flames enveloped them, heating up the nearby air with its blistering temperature. The simian vultures' howls came to a sudden stop. The blue-robed cultivator was delighted at having just escaped death. He then quickly commanded the magic tool to return to him and shot 40 meters away before taking out a talisman and slapping it on his body. With a yellow light barrier appearing on his body, the blue-robed cultivator felt safer, now realizing that spell techniques were different in practice and reality. His inexperience had nearly resulted in his death. With that thought, he couldn't help but look downward with surprise to see Han Li, who was also wearing an azure cloak. Of course, the blue-robed cultivator knew it was he who saved his life. The fireballs that Han Li released with his foundation establishment cultivation weren't enough to slay the Grade 2 demon beasts. The two simian vultures shortly flew out of the flames with an even more grotesque appearance. The vultures had most of their features burned away and no longer paid the blue-robed cultivator any attention, as they were now flying in Han Li's direction. As for the vulture with its claw chopped off, it was now rushing towards the blue-robed cultivator with scarlet eyes. Han Li looked at the two huge birds and unconsciously wrinkled his brow. He then slapped one of the pouches at his waist and released two streaks of white light, each of them containing a half-foot-long snow-white centipede. The two centipedes were far smaller than the simian vultures, but they appeared to buzz with excitement, as if holding no fear of them. As soon as the centipedes were summoned, they rushed to meet the vultures head-on, but the vultures' ape heads contorted in fear and hurriedly flapped their wings to stop their charge. After smelling the insects with their nostrils, they even attempted to flee in fear. The scent of ancient exotic insects wasn't something that low-grade demon beasts dared to approach. However, the two centipedes possessed no intent to allow them to run free. They released a monstrous screech and opened their mouths, spitting out white glacial chi that rushed forward with intense speed. The vultures could only let out a miserable scream before they were submerged by it. The centipedes then flew forward in a gust of wind and entered the glacial chi without any hesitation. When Han Li saw this, he paid no further attention to the battle on his side and turned to look at the blue-robed cultivator. The blue-robed cultivator was controlling the small sword as sweat drenched his body. As for the injured simian vulture, it was still putting up quite a fight and appeared just as vicious as when it was healthy. It was deftly running in circles around the blue-robed cultivator in a brown blur, incessantly cawing, and would occasionally attack at the light barrier with its single claw. The constant attacks on the light barrier left the blue-robed cultivator distraught and incapable of wholeheartedly focusing on the battle. Although the flying sword was powerful, its master was far too unaccustomed to using it. He was able to injure the vulture initially when he caught it off guard, but he now could barely keep track of it. As for his other talismans, they were beyond the abilities of the blue-robed cultivator. It was already difficult to control the sword magic tool. It would be impossible to further divide his attention. If nothing else happened, he would soon suffer defeat and perish. A cold glint flickered in Han Li's eyes as he saw the simian vulture turning several times in the air. Just as he pondered whether or not he should help, the vulture sensed something and let out a caw before stopping to chase the blue-robed cultivator. It then unfolded its wings and traveled over 40 meters away in an instant. This scene came as a surprise to both the blue-robed cultivator and Han Li, but Han Li simply snorted. He unceremoniously raised his hands, and a red thread shot out. The vulture's figure suddenly stopped in the air before smashing into the ground, motionless. Although he had only entered the endless sky plains recently, Han Li had heard of the extreme grudges the simian vultures could hold. As he didn't wish for any problems to occur in the future, he decided it would be best to cut the problem short while he could. Han Li's sudden attack came as a surprise to the blue-robed cultivator, and he shouted out in alarm, "A flying needle! You use flying needle magic tools." Han Li glanced at the blue-robed cultivator and calmly asked, "What? Is there anything strange about that?" He waved his hand towards the vulture's corpse, and a red streak shot back into his hand. It was an inch-long sparkling silver needle that glowed with red light. "Of course not, it's only—" Before the blue-robed cultivator could continue his explanation, he was interrupted with two muffled thuds. Two sparkling white blocks of ice fell to the ground and left meter-deep holes where they landed. Inside these ice blocks were both of the simian vultures, wide-eyed and obviously dead. As the blue-robed cultivator stared in shock, a white light flashed from the blocks of ice, and two streaks of light flew out, circling around Han Li before landing on his shoulder. The blue-robed cultivator dryly swallowed and asked, "Your esteemed self cultivates spirit insects?" Han Li stroked one of the centipedes on his shoulder and said, "That's right. I am the one who nurtured these two glacial snow centipedes." Glacial snow centipedes weren't something that Han Li fabricated. They were a true exotic insect, and after maturity, they appeared similar to the current form of the six-winged frost centipedes. If one wasn't experienced with exotic insects, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Much to Han Li's surprise, the blue-robed cultivator eagerly said, "Would fellow Taoists be willing to part with the flying needle and the spirit insects? I will purchase them at a great cost." Han Li was taken aback for a moment and then smiled, saying, "Is fellow Taoist joking? These insects have already recognized me as their master, and you might not be able to afford my price for the flying needle." "Spirit stones are no matter. I will accept any price you state." The blue-robed cultivator spoke in an overbearing tone without thinking the matter through. His heart was stirred from the sight of the needle slaying the simian vulture in an instant. When Han Li heard this, he narrowed his eyes. After examining the blue-robed cultivator for a long while, his expression grew sullen and he coldly said, "Apologies, but this needle is very convenient for me to use. For the time being, I cannot sell it." "Since you are unwilling, then so be it. If I also had such an incisive magic tool, I might not be willing to sell it either," the blue-robed cultivator responded with disappointment. Then, with a flicker of his eyes, he asked with a calm tone, "My name is Feng Yue, and I have yet to properly thank you for saving my life. Might I ask for your esteemed name?" "My surname is Han. How about we put everyone in order first?" Han Li indifferently said. "In order?" The blue-robed cultivator was stunned for a moment before glancing around. At an unknown time, the mortals had come out of hiding and were standing up. However, all of them were crowding 30 meters away from the cultivators with expressions of reverence. The leaders from both the tribes were the only ones standing close to them. They appeared somewhat excited, but Ying Lu appeared particularly happy. Ying Lu had clearly saw the three simian vultures were slain entirely by immortal Han, who he had hired along the way. This immortal's grand abilities were found beyond what he had expected, much to his delight. It seemed that he alone would be enough to keep them safe on the journey. Han Li called out to the tribe leaders and commanded, "Deal with the demon beasts. Bring me their claws and tail feathers. As for the rest, you may use them as you wish." According to the rules of the plains, the slayer of the demon beast had a claim over all of its parts. Although these materials were meager and of lesser quality, they were naturally valuable to a foundation establishment cultivator, and Han Li couldn't ignore them under his current identity. "Yes, we will follow your orders," Ying Lu said with delight. The flesh of the simian vulture might be worth nothing to an immortal, but they were very valuable in the eyes of mortals and could be traded for many things. Tribe leader Ba also acknowledged the order with a respectful tone. Then, the two let out a series of yells, and the burly youths of the tribes walked out to deal with the corpses of the vultures. The one slain by the flying needle was easy to prepare, but the frozen vultures needed to first be shattered. "If immortal Feng is unharmed, then how about you return to your carriage and rest? I feel somewhat tired as well, and will be heading back first." Han Li spoke to the blue-robed cultivator with an indifferent tone, and then walked back towards his carriage without waiting for a response. Han Li's indifferent attitude left the blue-robed cultivator at a loss. He had originally planned on making friends with him after seeing his incisive magic tool and spirit insects, but Han Li had unexpectedly cut him short and departed, leaving him in an awkward position. From the kindness of having been saved by Han Li and the strength he revealed as well, the blue-robed cultivator couldn't retort. After a long while, he could only sigh and resentfully return to his carriage. Unbeknownst to the blue-robed cultivator, Han Li was sitting cross-legged in the carriage, silently looking at him as he departed. "Master, that person has quite a bit of backing. Why has Master separated himself from him?" Silvermoon's baffled voice appeared in his mind. After resting for a time, Silvermoon had finally recovered enough strength to speak without effort. "That person isn't from the soaring tribes." "What? How does Master know this?" Han Li's sudden statement came as a shock to Silvermoon. "Take a look at this." Han Li suddenly opened his hand and summoned a ball of blue light into it. It was the image of a jade pendant engraved with ancient characters. "These are ancient characters from the Great Jin," Silvermoon said, shocked. "In fact, I reckon that nothing would have happened to him even if I didn't act. The jade pendant Feng Yue carried on his body is a top-grade magic tool. Every time the demon bird would draw close to him, it would automatically release a series of spirit waves to protect him. He concealed it at his waist with only a meager layer of fabric, and I was able to clearly see it with my bright-sight spirit eyes. They most likely belong to a noble clan in the Great Jin." Silvermoon grew pensive and said, "That's right. From ancient records, the Feng of Ning was a noble clan that extensively made use of its grand name. It seems our fellow Taoist Feng should be fellow Taoist Feng instead. But where is this Ning anyways? Is it the state of Ning in the 36 Jin Empire territories? Or is it the West Ning province in one of its 108 provinces? Or is it from some common city named Ning?" Because Han Li wished to go to the Jin Empire, he acquired many ancient records relating to it. He didn't find her earlier statements surprising, because he knew Silvermoon had looked through many of them as well. Regardless of what great Jin clan he is a disciple of, his appearance in the endless sky plains is a sign of trouble. As such, the less contact I have with him, the better. As of current, our priority is departing from the plains and finding a way to dissolve the baleful chi on my body. With that said, he closed his eyes. Silvermoon chuckled and agreed. "That's about right. Since this person is only at early foundation establishment stage and possesses a protective magic tool on that level, he must be an important character to the Feng clan. But since he had now concealed himself in an escort for the tribute of a small tribe, there is certain to be some trouble following him." Soon after, Silvermoon kept quiet as well. A while later, several of the youths eventually managed to break through the huge chunks of ice trapping the simian vultures with large hammers, and they were able to properly butcher the 3 simian vultures. Afterwards, they gave the most precious of the materials, the claws and tail feathers, over to Han Li. The parts left over were divided amongst the 2 tribes. Of course, because Han Li was the immortal that the Grey Heron tribe invited, they received the majority of the remains. While tribe leader Ba didn't acquire much, he was happy nonetheless as they acquired an unexpected harvest, despite the fact that his tribe's immortal hadn't killed any of the beasts. Inside the Red Wolf tribe's sealed carriage, the blue-robed cultivator took off his cloak to reveal a pale face. Apart from overly thin lips, he appeared rather handsome. At that moment, he wore a cold expression and he patted around his neck before finding a golden chain that had a silver key linked to it. The key was thick as a finger and several inches long. Mysterious designs were engraved on it along with a golden character, Feng. After staring at the key, Feng Yue revealed a strange expression. Then, his face wavered between excitement and pain before ultimately wearing a gloomy expression. He let out a long breath before carefully putting away the key. After confirming that no one could see the key as it hung on his neck, he closed his eyes and began to restore the magic power he had just consumed. Not long after they finished cleaning the carcass of the last simian vulture, the 2 tribes began to set forth once more. This time, none dared to wantonly speak in loud voices. Although the battle against the vultures didn't last long, it had shaken many of the soaring tribe's youths. Those with spirit veins felt particularly excited and wished they could fly over to the temple immediately so that they may acquire the vast power of an immortal. The following day was uneventful, but as Han Li was comprehending the incantation to dissolve the pestilence demon's soulic seal, the so-called temple encampment had entered the range of his spiritual sense. Out of fear that there would be high-grade immortals stationed near the encampment, Han Li didn't dare to sweep his spiritual sense close by, but he did faintly mix spiritual chi fluctuations, indicating there were many low-grade cultivators nearby. Han Li's eyes wandered, but his face remained expressionless. After traveling 10 kilometers, both the tribes let out a cheer. Han Li's expression stirred and he swept his sleeve, opening the carriage's curtains. He saw flat plains around them and a large black dot in the distance. Blue light flickered in Han Li's eyes, and he was able to clearly see what was the black dot. There was a wall 12 meters tall formed from thick stone and logs. At the back of the wall, there were lofty tents the soaring tribes were fond of, and a few crude wooden buildings. Occasionally, soaring tribes' mortals would roam around them, causing the area to appear rather lively. Amongst the tents and wooden buildings, there was a faintly seen hall made from a single huge stone, surrounded with sparsely few buildings. A few peculiarly dressed cultivators would occasionally walk into the hall. As Han Li's gaze wandered across this so-called encampment, he would spot huge stone pillars erected across its perimeter. These stone pillars glowed with dazzling light, and they were 100 meters tall and thicker than the width of a person. This was clearly a large-scale spell formation placed by the Endless Sky Temple to protect the encampment. There were also no cultivators flying inside the encampment, so it was clear to see the spell formation restricted travel by air. After sizing up the town, Han Li had no further interest in and closed the curtain. 2 hours later, Han Li's party had arrived at the entrance of the encampment. There weren't any guards to speak of, and the group entered as they pleased. Ying Lu and the tribe leader Ba had a brief discussion before separating and heading off in their own direction. Inside the encampment, Han Li was able to clearly see everything with his spiritual sense. It was exactly as he saw in the distance, chaotic. Fur tents and wood buildings were scattered everywhere, and only the main roads were clear. It was clear that apart from the stone structures, the buildings were only temporary shelter for the tribes that were passing through to offer tribute. However, those that needed to rest here were all the small tribes that had to travel the farthest. Larger tribes didn't have the need to travel farther as they resided near the temple. As a result, a vast majority of these tents and wooden buildings appeared entirely ordinary, with a few that even had patches on them. Only the wealthiest tribes among them had a few slightly larger tents with a few minor decorations. It was clear to see these small tribes weren't very wealthy. After difficultly finding an empty area in a remote corner of the encampment, the Gray Heron tribe began to set up their tents. Han Li walked out from the carriage and indifferently observed their actions. Ying Lu hesitated for a moment before he walked over to Han Li and spoke with a respectful tone. "Immortal Han, it is quite disorderly here. I fear it isn't suitable for the peaceful cultivation of a great immortal such as yourself. There is a resting area specialized in housing immortals. How about Immortal Han rest there for the time being? In 2 days, we will resume our journey." "I will then. In 2 days' time I will come find you." Han Li nodded and then took off in the direction of the tallest structure in the encampment, a huge 2-story stone hall. There were cultivators that would occasionally enter and leave. It was clear this was the building Ying Lu had mentioned. After walking a short distance, Han Li arrived in front of the stone hall. The entrance had 2 15-meter-tall sculptures to either side of the entrance, flood dragons with the head of a bull. Han Li took a brief glance before passing it by. Although he was confident his disguise as a soaring tribe's cultivator was perfect, he felt ill at ease for being near so many other soaring tribe cultivators. If there were any nascent soul cultivators nearby, it could end badly for him. It would be better for him to leave the encampment and find some place nearby. Then in 2 days' time, he would continue to travel with the Gray Heron tribe. By the time they arrived at the Endless Sky Temple, the rumors about him should have subsided, and he'll then resume his journey to leave the plains. Although it will still be quite some time until he could enter the Great Jin Empire, the journey would go smoother if he were careful. With that in mind, Han Li calmly walked out from the encampment and took out a small sword before using it to fly in a streak of light. About 30 kilometers away, Han Li stopped above an unremarkable field of scattered stone. He swept his gaze around him and descended upon a 20-meter-tall boulder. He sat cross-legged on it before releasing his spiritual sense around him, sweeping the perimeter for 10 kilometers to find there was no one around him. He then turned around and flicked his fingers to the huge boulder in front him. A wave of azure sword chi cut through it and created a 6-meter-wide hole inside of it, just enough for a person to enter. Han Li sat down cross-legged to test the hole and felt the interim shelter was to his satisfaction. He then walked 30 meters in front of the huge boulder and took out a set of formation flags. Over 10 streaks of light shot out, and an invisibility spell formation was placed around the boulder. From the outside, the huge boulder completely disappeared from view. Han Li entered the spell formation in a blur and completely vanished from sight. In the blink of an eye, an entire day had already passed. Han Li was silently meditating in his cave, comprehending the incantation that Monarch's soul divergence had given him. The process went far smoother than he had anticipated, and he was close to finishing it, much to his delight. As he pondered about a problematic portion of the incantation, his brow stirred and his mind snapped out of meditation. He opened his eyes with a flabbergasted expression. The blue-robed cultivator gives his name as Chinese letter F macron NG instead of Chinese letter F acute NG. They are partially homophones apart from their change in tone. See above, it is engraved with his clan name. Silvermoon didn't raise any objections to his words. Then, Han Li closed his eyes and continued to sit in silence. A while later, Han Li let out a yelp and shock appeared on his face. This time, Silvermoon tactfully remained silent as Han Li tightly frowned before having sudden changes of expression. Senior Soul Divergence, if I remembered correctly, you said there were many techniques to dissolve my baleful qi. Is it true that most of these techniques are Buddhist? That is true, Monarch's Soul Divergence lazily replied. Confucians and Taoists also have many of their own techniques to dissolve baleful qi, but none are as effective as Buddhist techniques. As Han Li's expression wavered, he said, "Then is it true that the most obvious property of Buddhist techniques is that a majority of them release a seven-colored light when they are activated?" That is right. Why, have you discovered something? Monarch's Soul Divergence asked with a curious tone. Han Li lowered his head and muttered, "In that case, this person might be useful. This could be an opportunity." Monarch's Soul Divergence grew somewhat annoyed that Han Li wouldn't answer his question. Just as he thought to ask more about it, Han Li resolved himself and set forth, riding a magic tool out of his cave in an azure streak. This action came as a surprise to Silvermoon and Monarch's Soul Divergence, but after seeing Han Li act with such haste, they could only save their questions for later. Han Li quickly arrived at a small forest rarely seen in the endless sky plains. It spanned about half a kilometer and was made of sparse and short trees. At the center of the forest, there was a patch of empty land that spanned about 30 meters wide where the two previous cultivators resided. The blue-robed cultivator was lying face down on the ground. He was motionless and had a black bloodstain on his back. While it was unknown whether he was still alive, a gorgeous seven-colored light covered his body. There was also other person nearby, a purple-robed old man with eagle-shaped eyes. He was striking at the light barrier with a fire-red flying sword. Although the seven-colored light barrier was unordinary, it had already begun to wildly shake and flash with light as it had no master controlling it. Han Li didn't conceal his sudden approach, alerting the purple-robed old man below. In the old man's shock, he swept his spiritual sense past Han Li and relaxed after finding that he was only a Foundation establishment cultivator. The old man then surged with killing intent and raised his hand, launching a remarkable fast black streak at Han Li. It was a tri-pointed stake wrapped in black qi. Han Li coldly snorted and stroked the top of his head. Then, a black-green cloud flew out from it and transformed into a meter-long hand, swiping at the approaching black streak. The purple-robed old man was shocked when he saw this. Before he realized what was happening, the tri-pointed stake was caught with ease, and in an instant, he felt his connection severed. Then, the giant hand began to fly downwards. In the old man's shock, he flusteredly formed incantation gestures, ordering the red flying sword to protect him. But suddenly, the black-green hand disappeared, and a second later, it reappeared 3 meters above him as a fist and fiercely smashed down upon him. Ah! The purple-robed old man let out a miserable scream before he was pounded into a bloody mush. Afterwards, the black-green fist unfolded back into a hand and swiped across the old man's remains, taking an egg-sized ball of green light. The hand then immediately shot back in Han Li's direction and circled once around him before transforming back into a nascent soul. The nascent soul sat down on Han Li's shoulder with a beaming smile and held the tri-pointed stake in one hand and a small ball of green light in the other. Han Li's expression stirred at the sight of this. While he was besieged by the soaring tribe's cultivators, he didn't use his second nascent soul even once, keeping it in reserve for a critical opportunity to escape. However, it now proved far stronger than he had anticipated. A simple transformation technique was capable of easily slaying a core formation cultivator without the slightest resistance. With that thought, he began to float down and approach the rainbow light barrier. At that moment, the red flying sword had fallen to the ground, as its master had now perished. It simply shined with faint light as it laid motionless. Han Li didn't pay the sword any attention and walked right towards the seven light barrier before closely examining it. He was able to clearly see the light barrier had originated from the blue jade pendant floating at the center of the barrier. The jade pendant floated a meter above the blue-robed cultivator's body, and it glowed with seven-colored light. A few strange Buddhist characters would occasionally appear in the light. It was the jade pendant Han Li showed to Silvermoon and was inscribed with the words, Feng of Ning. Han Li stared at the jade pendant for a moment before slowly asking, "How is it, Senior? Is this magic tool refined by a Buddhist sect?" Monarch Soul Divergence coldly snorted and indifferently said, "The materials and magic tool are clearly of Buddhist make. However, it was clearly refined by a high-grade Buddhist cultivator. This magic tool wouldn't have been able to block the attacks of a core formation level magic treasure for such a long period of time if that weren't the case. It seems there is a relationship between a Buddhist sect and the Feng clan." Han Li rejoiced after hearing Monarch Soul Divergence's explanation, knowing his actions hadn't been in vain. He then stepped forward and pressed his hand against the barrier, covering it in a faint layer of blue flames. With his current cultivation, he wasn't able to control a large amount of the celestial ice flames, and these meager amount of flames were already pushing his limit. But this proved more than enough, as the seven-colored light barrier wasn't able to withstand its frigid cold for long. Soon after, the light barrier collapsed with a bang. Han Li approached the blue-robed cultivator and examined the black bloodstain on his back before frowning. He sensed the blue-robed cultivator's aura had become incredibly unstable and weak. His body already started to emit the scent of death, and it was clear his life wouldn't last much longer. Without any hesitation, Han Li struck the blue-robed cultivator's body with a magic seal and opened his mouth to spit out a cloud of azure chi that enveloped the blue-robed cultivator. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, the youth's body flipped onto its back. Han Li stared at the blue-robed cultivator and immediately felt his blood run cold. It was truly Feng Yue, but his complexion was now totally black, and his lips had turned a faint purple. It was a horrid sight to behold. Han Li grimaced. After a moment of thought, he spread his spiritual sense throughout Feng Yue's body, and blue light flickered from his eyes. The poison had already spread throughout his body, and he should already be dead by all means. Given how odd this was, Han Li carefully continued his examination. A short moment later, Han Li found something and tugged at Feng Yue's collar. With a zap, a piece of his robes tore off, revealing a chain held onto a silver key. The key pulsed with white light and continuously dispersed of the poison at the center of Feng Yue's chest, which had also turned jet black. Han Li's gaze wandered and he grabbed onto Feng Yue's arm. Azure light then glowed from his palm and quickly spread through Feng Yue's body, slowly dispelling the poison. But suddenly, the azure spiritual chi that Han Li released was turning black, and it began to quickly spread back to his hand. "Agony poison!" Han Li yelled, and his complexion paled. He immediately withdrew his hand and severed his spiritual chi connection to Feng Yue's arm. "Yi, one of the 10 absolute poisons. Youngster Han, you've wasted your energy. There is no way of saving this person now." Monarch Soul Divergence chuckled and spoke with a tone of schadenfreude. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes and annoyedly snort. "It might be impossible for me to completely remove the poison, but it won't be difficult for me to awaken him and keep him alive for 10 days. I merely need to use a good number of spirit medicines, but I don't know if it will be worth the cost." With that said, Han Li stood up and wore a pensive expression. Silvermoon then suggested, "Master, how about you awaken him first and have him make a few things clear before you come to a decision?" "That's true. Until I know about his relationship to the Buddhist sects of the Great Jin, I am unwilling to take any further actions." Soon after, Han Li slapped his storage pouch and produced a small white bottle into his hand.